The white horse.
Yeah, what's good, everybody? I'm GG. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. It's the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chasers. And today, I'm joined with two friends, Admiral, excuse me, damn, I can't even get it out, man. Admiral Smoke and the Nameless Protagonist. What's cracking with y'all, man?
What's going on, man? Nothing going on with you.
Yeah, man, ain't nothing going on with me, man. Glad to have you here today, man. It's been a while since I've done a show at all, and so shout out to y'all, man. God bless, and hopefully y'all had a happy holiday. You know, have a Merry Christmas if you celebrated it. It's nothing really special for me, but you know, oh well. Yeah. But glad y'all are here today, man. We were talking about some things, you know, behind the board, and one of the things we talked about, you know, is this class distinctions that black people make among themselves, man, and. Man, I'm astounded. I am truly stupefied by the amount of superficial class distinctions, the kinds of superficial class distinctions that are made amongst people in the black manosphere.
Yeah, but
I'm literally astounded by it. And it's not that, first of all, let me just say this. You already know that I'm educated, correct? Okay, we know this. I have an advanced degree, right? One could argue that just based upon the fact that I have an advanced degree, that I could be an uppity asshole. Like, I'm smarter than you. I am more accomplished than you. I'm more educated than you. And so, therefore, I'm more dismissive than you are. Yeah. Right? Like, or I'm a member of the bureaucracy and the technocratic class, and so therefore, like what you have to say is unimportant, superficial, not erudite, and so therefore, you know, I could kind of gloss over whatever commentary you have because I'm an expert, whereas you're just a random nigga, right? I'm not saying that this is the way I think or the way I approach other men, but I could be that way. Okay, predicated upon my educational level, and I know that there are times when I use colloquialisms and obscenities, but I don't have to be bound by that. I do that in order to keep a common touch so that I'm accessible. But I can use graduated terminology. I don't have to utilize obscenity. I don't have to. I am well versed. In other words, my vocabulary and my vernacular is spectacular. Okay? This is the truth, okay? Now, but the thing is, there are a lot of guys in this space who, in my honest opinion, believe that they're black Brahmins. Like, they're...
Hey, yo, coin that term. Coin that term. Coin that term. That needs to go right in the lexicon for the future. Because go ahead, Gigi. I just really want to highlight that point.
You really believe that you're a part of an elevated class of black men? Like in other words, there were, you know, in various places, you know, where I've been in my life, okay, the 100 black men, or, you know, like the Zulus in New Orleans or something, okay, or the Omegas, you know, like at a university, or, for example, the Masons, okay, or... I mean, God knows what kind of social groups that exist where men, you know, draw distinctions among themselves and others, and in so doing, demonstrate that they have attained a higher level of awareness or an accomplishment that others haven't, or that they're morally superior than others, or something of that nature, right? I mean, it's all centered around either I'm better than you. Now, I'm not saying every organization like this, but there are some guys within these organizations who feel like that. Okay? Not to say that they're not. But to be like a blue-collar working nigga, and to believe that you're a black Brahmin? I'm stupefied. I am fucking stupefied by it.
But we gotta be real
astounded.
But we gotta be real about what's really piecing this together so that people can really understand what it is you're talking about. Because class and caste are fraternal twins. It's important to understand that when we're dealing with class, these are multiple factors that have to do with not just your upbringing, but the education, much like what you were talking about, Gigi. There are many environments you find yourself in, and you are amongst other individuals within a different class because there are economic factors that determine that. There's familial backgrounds that determine that. There's entire networks that go into play with regard to that many people will never have access to, irrespective of the previous factors I just listed. However, with caste, all it takes is one thing, and normally it's something that you had no control over, that you came into this earth with. All it takes is one thing for you to have, and irrespective of where you go within the modality of class, no matter where you go with regards to your own personal achievements or failures, you remain in that specific classification. That's a caste system.
Correct. And I mean, one could argue that, in terms of a de jure principle, a legal principle, especially now, that there is no one in American society who is relegated to any kind of caste. Okay? There's no titles of nobility. There are no specific caste classifications anymore. I mean, not to say that these things did not exist in the context of the United States history. But I mean, contemporarily, we don't say that a caste system legally de jure exists within the context of the United States. But we do know that there are certain de facto conditions that exist in the United States that relegate certain groups of persons and demographics of persons to specific kinds of outcomes, right? Or that create specific kinds of conditions. And not to say that, people are determined in an absolute sense in the way that they would be in a caste system, okay? But I mean, by and large, there are systems, institutions, and structures in place which create deleterious outcomes for certain kinds of persons. These are the facts. Now, I mean, we can argue about how to contend, how to respond, how to react to the truth about that matter, but the truth of that matter obtains. Okay? It is what it is. Now, everybody's asking for a solution. Everybody wants, a prognosis or diagnosis and a plan for treatment. That's what everybody is, desiring. And there are a group of people specifically in this space who argue that, they have the formula. It's like you DOC now, motherfucker. You got the formula, right? You have it all mapped out. You have it worked out. You're superior morally. Or, there's some information that you have, or there's some kind of value system that you have that makes you exceptional in your demographic, right? So to speak. But when you look at the numbers and you still look at the data relegated to, the entirety of the fucking demographic to which you belong, you haven't moved the needle. You haven't moved the volume level on the, the decibel meter. You haven't turned up the volume. So, my whole thing is, man, stop. All I'm saying is, man, if you can't demonstrate that you've actually put a dent in progress for black folks, man, stop acting like you're a part of the fucking black Brahmin class, man. Cut it out. Stop it. You haven't done a fucking thing. You haven't moved the needle. You haven't changed anything at all. We're still in the condition that we've been in. And the unfortunate reality is black men are slipping as we speak. The data on this is clear. I've demonstrated it on several occasions. We are on a downwardly mobile track. Now, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You can say, well, how do we respond? Like, what are the answers? All you're doing is talking about the problem. Well, before you can even begin to solve the problem, you have to know what the problem is. And it's one thing to just say, I'm superior and fuck all these other niggers, these pookies and all of this. That's not changing anything. That's just, that's scapegoating and stereotyping. It's not policy. To be a snob. The last time I checked, when is being a snob, if you're still a member of a demographic that's on a downwardly mobile track, how's that uplifting the fucking community? I'll wait for anyone to say that. Give me the evidence that actually works. So anyway, man, I'm gonna let you take over, Sand Dog, and tell us where we left off and where we need to go from here, man.
Okay, so basically, the last time we talked, right, we had two shows on the situation paragraph of the op order, right, and so what we're looking to do is that we're looking to identify institutions, right, institutions, state institutions, non-state institutions, educational institutions, economic institutions, and then ultimately the cornerstone institution of family. And we're looking at the roles of these institutions, against American history, to the point that you brought up earlier, was to identify where we are and how we got there. And this is to further to help define the caste system in a sense that we've been forced into, and the role that this caste system plays in our current conditions. So it goes back to what we were talking about behind the scenes, that, for human beings, you can make individual decisions that could better your life outcomes, right? You could play the cards that you were dealt and make something of yourself. But then also there are larger things at play that put people in positions and circumstances that they may not have had any business being in the first place, right? So we can argue the whole things about, again, life isn't fair or this, that, and the third. But the idea, at least in this go round or this first portion of the op order, is to help you understand the state, which is which is defining the state. And for the most part, since the state is the institution that passes laws and uphold the laws, that is the institution that has the most impact on culture and outcomes, because it's the lawmaking body, it will have a direct effect on all of the other institutions that are previously mentioned. Right.
Okay, so just tell me how, like, if you want me to move forward, tell me to move forward. If you want me to withdraw and move back, tell me to move back.
Okay, no problem. So, again, we discussed, like, in the situation portion, what you're learning is you're learning the disposition, right? The feelings, the thoughts, for the most part, of the other side that you're dealing with. So you're comparing yourself to them in the situation, right? And so you're getting an idea of what you are getting yourself into and what you're dealing with. And so again, you can go back to the last video or the video before that, and that will explain the situation. But if you can go, GG, all the way down to critical information requirement, right? So it's at the bottom. It's almost at the bottom. Right. So Yeah,
This is it right here. Okay.
Yeah, so this is it right here, right? So now when you get into there's critical information requirements, and there's also essential elements of friendly information. So these are the things, especially for me coming from the cavalry as a scout. These are the things that's going to ultimately form paragraph 2, which is the mission statement: who, what, when, where, why. Right? How is paragraph 3. So mission is overall what your objective is going to be, right? And so, for us, what we're looking at in this part of the discussion is we want to further define or identify the definition of the state. What is that? What is that exactly, right? And so when you get into further definitions, because even through my study, I found out that in the field of political science, people to this day are still debating exactly on what a state is, right? And
Of
so,
course.
one of the definitions that we have is a community or society politically organized under one independent government within a definite territory and subject to no outside influences, right? So now this is a state. So now when you talk about a community of people coming together within a given territory, not subject to outside influences, right? Now these are people that are now coming together to make laws or to establish a society and an environment based upon what it is that they value, right? And so in our previous discussions, we know that throughout different stages of American history, based upon the caste system that's been imposed on us, right, you will have two different groups of people or several different groups of people that will come to value different things and push them outside of the norms of what the state is or the objective of the state, right? So when you get to the Confederacy and the cornerstone speech from the Confederate Vice President, when he talked about how white supremacy, right, is the cornerstone, or what he desired, or what the Confederacy desired, the institution of slavery to be the cornerstone of American society, right? And so now this is an institution that's shaping your culture, because I want you guys to remember, right? The state is the primary. They're passing the laws. So the state has laws that impacts corporations, right? Or the economy or markets, right? They have laws on dealing with religious institutions. They have laws on dealing with economic institutions, and they have laws regarding the family. And all of these laws have come into play, right? They have come into play for either the good or benefit for the community that's been victimized by the caste system. So the state itself will now pass your Reconstruction Amendments, right? Your 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery, right? Your 14th Amendment that makes us allegedly citizens, under the law, and then the 15th Amendment that gives you the right to vote, right? And so in our previous discussions, the United States of America and its people will go back and forth with this, right? Which form of government runs the state? So we are a federal constitutional republic. So I know in previous slides I said we're a democracy, but a democracy is more or less where the majority rules in a democracy. But when you get to a constitutional federal republic, what happens is that the people themselves will elect a representative, and then that representative is, allegedly supposed to represent the will of the people, in other higher forms of government. So a constitutional federal republic tends to lead more towards the self-governance of people, in a constitutional federal republic more so than a democracy, which is ultimately, you're being ruled by the mob. And if you fall,
I want to make a small sidebar to go along with that point. On some FYI type stuff and for people's further research, just take a look at how a lot of businesses, particularly contract businesses, operate. And then listen to what Sandog just said once more. And I think it's important to remember that connotation, because that pattern, or rather this idea of democracy, is still a rather new thing relative to not just human history, but modern governments in general. But with regards to this model of governing that really revolves around this electing individuals to represent you in the same way you see a lot of businesses operate, specifically corporations, you're going to see a lot of patterns that go on here, specifically as it relates to the beginnings of America, which is why I always make the argument that we started first as a business entity that became a nation. And it's important to understand that, because it sets the mythos going forward as to how things change and why they do. Specifically, when you are in a situation now where money can now serve as free speech. In other words, money can be the individual that does the electing. But go ahead.
Yes, correct. So,
and one of the things I want to say, though, in terms of evaluation, right, or the whole concept of, how should the government be run? Well, we already know from the beginning that, the states were formed as colonies, and the colonies were utilized to extract resources and to make money so that they could bring it back to their respective nation states, whether it was Spain, England, Portugal, or France, right? We know this, okay? And eventually, especially in the United States, the English colonies rebelled, and they had a war, and of course, that's the Revolutionary War, which led to the establishment of the United States, okay? Which were colonies, which were, money-making colonies, extensions of the crown, okay? But there's been a debate in philosophical circles as to what role the government should play. Should the government be a reflection of the market, or should the government be a reflection of something different, okay? Ancient philosophers didn't have, money making on their minds as a noble enterprise. I mean, it's not something that the ancients perceived as being masculine at all. Which is funny, though, because today we perceive money making as emblematic of masculinity.
Fam, even in Japan, the merchant class was the lowest with regards to that. Farmers were held in higher regard.
Yeah, I mean, but it was funny, though, that now, success in the market is perceived as being emblematic of masculinity, whereas for the ancients, this just wasn't the case. Like the way that the noble way to earn resources is to take them, okay, through war, through conquest, not through, planning meticulously on how to find a malallocation in the market and exploit it so that you can make a profit. That's not the ancient model of masculinity at all, okay? But one of the things that occurred in relation to how men in the ancient, especially in ancient Western society, this is what I'm speaking of, paradigmatically. But I mean, what they would do is they would have meetings amongst each other to determine whether or not they were going to go to war and what to do in relation to the affairs of the state. And it was their responsibility and duty to meet, to convene, and to argue, not just about what was best for themselves in relation to market-based principles, which is what the market, basically assumes. Like the self-interest and egoism is the thing that makes everything productive and efficient, and it creates optimality. Okay, the invisible hand is what I'm speaking of in Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. Ancient people were like, we just take shit. Even if you look at Western expansion to the Northern Americas, okay? What did they do? Yeah, they made money, but I mean, they also just took shit, didn't they? Like, why are people stupefied?
Manifest destiny on that. Go ahead.
Why are people stupefied by the idea that, like, the free, like this whole laissez-faire, we're gonna just find malallocations in the market and exploit them, and this makes me somehow very smart and adroit. That's not how real wealth is accumulated, man. People are cutthroat, man. They take shit. Part of the reason that the Western world has become as wealthy as it has is because of conquest, colonialism, violence. Right? Or am I missing something? I'm going to let you get back to it. But if we keep telling lies and then we accept what, the abstract principles that they espouse without actually being prepared to do what these people do, then come on, bruh.
You also have to remember the moral high ground that the West has taken lately on account of really pushing, and I guess it's America that really spearheaded this campaign, really pushing democracy on planet Earth and champion it as this kind of higher upstanding moral ground by which they can assert. I don't know any other word of calling it colonialism, but that's really what it is. And at first we saw this with religion, but now it's with this new form of, quote, new form of government that just is supposedly seen as superior to everybody else's, that just gets shoved in front of everybody's faces. And it's done on top of wealth that was acquired the very way you just finished describing. Meanwhile,
it's called neo-colonialism.
Well, there we go. So here we go with this, and we're probably in the third wave with intersectionality, but that's another story. But here we go with this whole dynamic of, I stole and robbed and pillaged and took everything, but you got to get this bread by bootstrapism and just figuring it out, some other way that we're not even doing. And even if you figure it out, we'll probably take your idea, copy it, and do it better than you do because we got more resources behind us to back it up. So this is the reality we're in right now. So nobody can really talk honest about this without having consequences applied to it all, which is why it gets goofy. But I think it's important you highlighted that, Gigi, because you're multiplying by zero unless you really get to the crux of it all. Resources don't manifest from the ether. They're finite and they are somewhere. And if you're telling people to make something out of nothing by squeezing water out of rocks, you're not going to solve any issue, which should really speak to what the agenda is, to stop paying attention to what I got and stay busy with nothing and be happy with it.
Man, you said a mouthful there, but Sandog, would you continue with your lecture, sir?
Yes. And so again, and that's what I'm trying to say. So again, shout out to everything that you guys are saying, right? Because these are the ways that you have to think. You need to understand the system, and you need to be able to speak the language of the system. You have in order to you'll say in order to kind of maneuver around some of the things that the caste system has put in place, right? And so now, when we get into the discussion on civil rights, right? You remember you're a slave. There's the 3/5 compromise. You have 100-year or more struggle of people in the South or parts of the United States doing everything they can to roll back the Reconstruction Amendments, right? And so now, when you talk about a civil rights movement, this is actually a movement for citizenship, right? And so now, you get into, so what makes a citizen, right? A citizen is a person who, by place of birth, nationality of one or both parents, or naturalization, is granted full rights and responsibilities as a member of a nation or political community, right? So for us being born here, and fulfilling the obligations of being a citizen in and of itself has not been enough, right? And so now, when you talk about the role of citizens in society, now here's what's funny, right? So now you think about the slave codes, the black codes, and Jim Crow, right? So the rights of citizens are a right to a fair trial, the right to vote, the right to bear arms, to hold office, freedom of speech, press, religion, etc. Right? So now these are the rights of citizens. So when people start to talk about reparations for African Americans in the United States, right? So these are the rights of citizens. Now, despite slavery and Jim Crow, right? Here are the duties of a citizen. attending school, right? Jury duty, which, you know, I'm certain we got a fair shake at that. Obeying the laws, which we have. Paid taxes, which we have, and defended the nation, right? So now, for the most part, to the best of your ability, despite slavery, despite Jim Crow, and despite the kind of non-voluntary circumstance that you're in, because I'm missing the word, because just like Gigi, right? We have a lot of fancy terms in organizational behavior and theory that you can use, but in simple terms, this caste system that started out in America for the benefit of the planter class, sad and most unfortunately, it's now endemic in many of our institutions. And whether you were a slave or not, this system is going to touch you, right? If you are now of a certain socioeconomic status, right? You know, again, being white or whatever it is, that's no longer going to help you, right? Because this machine, this beast is in full swing and it's ready to eat, right? And so these are the things that we have to identify and understand this. So for African Americans, to the best of your ability, right, you have always tried to be a good citizen. So starting out even before the Revolutionary War, but starting out with everything from Christmas addicts all the way to Colonel Charles Young, up to Colin Powell, you know, Charles Faulkner and Sandog, right? You defended the nation, you paid the taxes, you obeyed the laws, and you went to school. So now, if I'm fulfilling the role of a citizen, why is there now an issue with me having the rights of a citizen? So when people talk about the case for reparations, right, you have that within slavery itself, and then also Jim Crow, where you were cut off from the things that will make you a citizen, right? But although despite the fact that you were fulfilling the roles.
Right. So before we move forward, let me do some housekeeping really quickly. I want to give a shout out to Dust T Nuts. You know, Dusty Nuts. Anyway, the marriage between state and business. I think he was making reference to some things that we were mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
Shout out to BGS Ibmore. He says, pass the plate. Yeah, and get the likes up, man. You know, I got 108 people watching. And I got like 70 likes, man. Get the likes up. Or if you don't like the material, give it a dislike. React. That way the algorithm, you know, will push the feed. Okay? Savant88 says, keep up the good work, team. Rue. Shout out to Nameless Protagonist as well. Rue, brother Savant. Shout out to you.
Yeah.
Well, be well and swell, sir. Be well and swell. And shout out to Roguish the Billmongers. He says, if you can't kick in on the likes, kick in with the ends. Twos and Fuse is welcome, dude. Osu. Yeah. So, you know, it is what it is, man. Brothers, you know, they're going to react to what they, you know, that which tickles their fancy. So shout out to Mike Johnston. He says, thanks for the lesson. Appreciate that, sir. And shout out to Keep It 100. I see he's in here, man. Shout out again to BGS. You know, I always got to give him a shout out. And shout out to Barry Little, who holds me down ever so diligently. Appreciate that brother there, man. So thank you so much, my brother, Barry Little. But yeah, if there's anything else you'd like to add to this, you know, the only thing that kills me is that, you know, initially, we already know that black people were not considered to be citizens. And in fact, I mean, we were 3/5 of a person, right? Which is, you know, really kind of screwed up when you think about it. Like, I mean, you know, like I'm 3/5 of a man. I'm not a full man. I'm like just, you know, part of a man.
Correct. Yeah. and remember, right? And then you have the northern government. I mean, to the southernest point, right? You know, you're saying you abhor this thing called slavery, but you have no problems taxing me.
Right.
And take it, you know, so, you know, and taking the money and using it. And so this is it goes back to what we said, and that's why it's very important to understand these fundamentals, right? Like on very simple terms, right? And so again, when you get into it, right? So civil rights are citizens' rights, and civil and political rights are a class of rights that protect individuals' freedoms from infringement by governments, right? Social organizations and private individuals, right? And so, and everything that I mentioned before, in terms of what you're supposed to have under civil rights, which is the right to vote, fair trial, government service, public education, and the use of public facilities. Again, all of these things are things that you are denied, despite the fact that you obeyed the laws, defended the nation, right? Got an education, and you wanted to vote, but then there were people out there that did not want you, to vote or hold office, right? So all of these things are tied to citizenship, right? And so, when you get to, when you get into that, right, then you have your civil liberties, right? And your civil liberties are, again, freedom of speech, freedom of press, no illegal search or seizure by law enforcement. Isn't that funny, right? The right to remain silent, the right not to testify against yourself, the right to privacy. So again, these things now will fall under civil liberties. And civil liberties are just basically guarantees and freedoms that the government commits to not abridging either by constitution, legislation, or judicial interpretation. Right. And
Shout out to Kelsey. Shout out to Kelsey on not testifying on herself.
Yeah.
In the Tory Lanez case. Shout out to Kelsey. Yeah.
So again, and so now I think, especially if you've been rocking with us through the other series that we have, now what you can see is that between the states and the citizens, right, there's a level of hypocrisy that's up here. As BGS and others have said in their videos, right, the math ain't mathing. And so now you can go into the next slide, Gigi.
Okay.
Yeah, the one after. And everything that Nameless said before, I was hoping that he will hold it until this, because again, this is the mission statement. So the mission statement is who, what, when, where, why. The how is the execution, right? So the United States of America's mission statement is to create a more secure, democratic, and prosperous world for the benefit of the American people and the international community, right? So, shout out to truth, justice, in the American way. And so, you know what I'm saying? So for many of us, and again, so now the math isn't mathing, because again, if you understand African American history, right, when you're going back into the civil rights era, a lot of the movement that happened for us in regards to civil rights was a result of the geopolitical environment at the time, right? So, again, America is engaged in the Cold War. Them and Russia are looking to build allies or whatever economic system that the world is going to go forward with. And we're like, hey, capitalism is great, democracy is great, but wait a minute, JFK, how could you get us to side with you when you have people who are second-class citizens in your nation, right? And then to add insult to industry, I think it was during the Freedom Rides, you had a terrorist attack, that killed several of the Freedom Riders, which was very embarrassing to the United States at the time. I think there was a conference in Vienna or wherever it was, and so that was something that was very embarrassing to the United States. And then this is part of what would push, civil rights legislation, right? And so one of the things that we always have to remember is that there is a juxtaposition to the geopolitical circumstances in the United States versus how people who are called Black that have been put on this chessboard could move. So after World War I, what was the concern when these guys came home, right? Hey, they seen more of the world. We know we're treating them like crap, and they've been exposed to this thing called communism, right? And that may be appealing to them, right? And so shout out again. Now you get shout out to the Red Scare, right? And, shout out to the Red Scare and the Red Summer. And so now, you have black men, thinking that they're coming home, that they'll be heroes, that they'll finally get their respect, that they'll finally be recognized by other citizens or their peers in society. And again, so this is not the case. And so now, when you look at the mission statement that's been put out here, again, right, you still get a lot of the fact that the math ain't mathing and what it is that we need to do. So can you go to the next slide? Okay, and so now you would get the mission statement of the citizen. And now the reason why this is very limited is because the American citizenry, right, they have never been unified, right? Because remember, we have always been split by this caste system called race. And now, since you can't do that anymore, we're now further divided by ideologies, right? And so, again, the American citizen's mission statement, at least from Sandal's perspective, will be the American citizen will vote, pay taxes, bear arms, and obey the law in order to preserve self-governance throughout the Union, right? And so when Gigi brought up the point that civil rights is no longer about improving the material condition of the people, right? So now, all across the world, you got people wanting to plant rainbow flags everywhere, but you got people living under bridges in California and taking a dump in the streets. But for some reason, but for some reason, something that has social has taken more, something I'm not going to say social, something that is, I think, more of a personal choice has taken precedence over the material condition of Americans that are actually suffering, right? And so now, as a citizenry, we are in trouble because we have been divided by this thing. We have been divided by this false thing called race, and now ideology. And so when I get into the execution paragraph, right, this is in a sense an offensive that's been taken against the American people from my perspective. So in military operations, when you're conducting an offensive operation, you have 4 fundamentals of the offense. And it's an acronym called SCAT, right? And that is surprise, right? So at the end of the day, see first, understand first, act first. You know what I'm saying? Concentration, right? Who you're targeting, audacity, the calculated risk, you know what I'm saying? And then, the tempo is your ability to sustain whatever action that you are engaged in, right? So now when you're looking at the American citizenry, right, whatever laws that the government passes, despite the fact that it is in your best interest, or for the most part may not be in your best interest, right? So look, we have a lot of things that are being passed now that are just insane, that the American people should be upset about. But because of ideological battles and racism and all of these other values, we're not there. So the fact now that they want to do things like, I think, tax PayPal, or everything that happened with the GameStop stock and all of these other things. So these are the types of things that Americans should be concerned about, right, in regards to their ability to accumulate wealth. So there's tax breaks and all these other things for corporations, but okay, I'm getting on YouTube, I have PayPal or whatever the case might be, and I can't enjoy the same tax breaks, or I don't have said tax breaks, and oh, by the way, I haven't had a decent raise since 1964. And oh, by the way, you haven't invested in the upgrade of infrastructure since the New Deal. And I just seen you send billions of dollars to the Ukraine. WTF.
Right? And that really goes to highlight how, at the end of the day, people just need that reminder that there has always been a class system in America. And that class system is the same one that was inherited from Europe. And that due to the events of the Bacon's Rebellion, they needed to create a way to get the masses to continue to work within this cultural paradigm that they brought with them, which is their in-group, out-group dynamic. And this is where we get into the perfection of the Southern strategy, which is why we get these scenarios. There's very few people that are able to see these things from a structural modality because they're always given somebody else to point the finger at. And unfortunately, that's what creates our caste. We end up being the convenient universal means by which everyone and everything else can compare themselves to so that they can feel good about the conditions that they find themselves in, even though there's a very concise and powerful oligarchy that is making a lot of those moves. And it's an oligarchy almost in a de facto sense, insofar as they don't have to, one, let you know they're there, two, a lot of it is voluntary, and number three, most of what has occurred that we see a lot of these power plays have happened as a result of the modern conveniences in modern society and the moves of these corporations into the everyday sectors of people's everyday lives. So when we talked about the institutions that you brought up before, by and large, the average American has nothing to do with them. When you look at the actual numbers of the population that's the most dominant, most of them don't even need to know about anything, and they will get by just off the sheer inertia of their class and the inertia of their classification. And it's interesting because that's baked into the culture now. So that anybody that, when you look at our demographic specifically in the Ado-social complex, we represent a perfect expression of American culture, so much so that we over exemplify the upper and lower echelons of American society and culture. And it's a big reason as to why we remain in this unique veil of non-interaction to actually address these things, which is why we have to talk about how these things are formed from an institutional basis, then from an ideological basis to lead us to why we need groups, to lead us to why we can't be comfortable with the American cultural status quo. Because not only is our role not in a position of power, the American culture itself sets people up to be this way because it requires a basis, it requires a capital to capitalize on.
Correct. And so again, and this is what I'm trying to say. So again, shout out to Gigi, right? Because again, right, of course, I believe in particular levels of responsibility. Like you guys heard me talk about internal locus of self-control versus an external locus of self-control. So it's no need to explain it. I believe that those things are self-explanatory. But when you look at the state, right? So remember, the state has a hand in everything. So, for example, in the future, we're going to talk about education, right? So now, again, so there's a debate on what? Critical race theory, right? So that's the new hot thing in education, right? And so you have a lot of people who are pushing back against it because, again, right, if you were to really dig into America's past and learn about it, you can no longer have the same perceptions. You can no longer have the same perceptions that you had before. And so again, and this is true of all nations, right? So it's not just an American thing, right? It's just, it's just that, you will just be in a position to no longer see things through rose-colored glasses, right? And so sad and most unfortunately with the United States, what happened with African Americans is the inertia for everything else, right? So if you're wondering how police officers will soon end up in black boots kicking out your door with RoboCop, it all started with, okay, the state told you these niggas don't know how to act, and we need to put a boot in their ass. We're gonna be tough on crime. We're not gonna address their real issues, right? So, we're going to lock them up, right? Because that fits the narrative that we fed you for the last few hundred years, right? That fits the narrative. We'll lock you up, and that will, quote unquote, solve the problem. And then everybody goes off into the sunset. You know, so Gigi, do you have that slide that, remember the photo I sent you about what the causes of crime?
I can go look for it. Let me see here.
Yeah, it's what, yeah.
See the functions of a government. I see the Bill of Rights. I see role of government. I don't see causes of crime. I don't have
Okay,
that.
I'll put it to you. Okay, so this is
do you
excellent.
have it? Do you have it to forward to me to where I could?
Yeah, I'll forward it to you. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
forward it to you. And so again, if we can, if you could bring up the functions of government, right? And then I think that's a good segue. And then I'll send you I'll send you that other photo right now. And I think that's a good segue into it. And then we could discuss it. So if you could bring up the one role of government, the functions of government, yeah.
And before I do that, I want to give a shout out to Insane Optimist. Thank you for your generous donation, sir. I appreciate that. Shout out to H the Great. Appreciate that. Also, shout out to Ghetto User. Appreciate your donation, sir. And I want to congratulate Benikin Kenton for becoming a member of the Green Gorilla channel. I appreciate that, sir. And shout out to Barry Little and Mike Johnston and Rogish the Billmonger. Appreciate y'all, you brothers, man. Appreciate that. And also on the Cash App end, I want to give a shout out to a few people. But for some reason, I can't get anything. Okay, I got it now. Corbett Goodwin and Troy, thank you for your donations. Appreciate that. So let me get right ahead to, I'm going to stop the screen and hit it again. Video file, not a video file. Slides. Everything is different here. Share screen. Yeah, okay, I think that's what we want there, right?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, bro.
Okay. So now what you're seeing is, again, role of the role of the government, right? Or the role of the state. So these are the functions of the government, right? So again, so now when you're paying your taxes, right? So again, you're talking about defense, right? And so defense of the state, be it, the reserves, National Guard, paramilitary organizations, right? Judiciary, right to a free trial, enterprise, your right to incorporate and assemble, social welfare, infrastructure, macroeconomic policy. And so again, macroeconomics is the big picture. This is when you get into states and corporations and how they influence economies. And so I'll talk about that on a bigger scale once we have, I'll get into that deeper once we have the discussions about economics. So I just don't want to blow my load on that social monopoly, and then also the control of monopoly, right? So now, for example, if you are looking at this, right, from the perspective of, the caste system that America established, during race, then you can see the fact, despite the fact that you have been doing all the things that a citizen should have been doing, you have not had access to all of the functions of government, right? You have been pushed out both by law and also vigilante activity, right? So when you look at, again, judiciary, right? Black people serving on juries, right? BGS is there. I wish, I wish BGS could come up, because I know it conceptually, but since BGS was outside for it and had a front row seat, I remember being a kid on the news when Rodney King got beat by the cops, and they moved. The court case, I guess, was supposed to be in the black side of LA or whatever it was, or Rodney King got beat up, but they moved the court case to the white side of town where the jury, where the jury would mostly be consisted of white people, right? So, again, to be tried by a jury of your peers. So there's been many times or instances with LAPD where they will shift so if there were any abuses between the police and the people on the ground, that they would shift where they would have court. When the cops are brought to court, they would shift the location of it where the jury and all of that things could function to their favor, right? Which is the math, the math ain't mathing, right? Again, so a lot of things don't make sense, when you get the infrastructure. And that's what I said, right? Shout out to FHA loans, shout out to the Homestead Act, right? Shout out to European immigrants getting land and being able to develop it. Again, Lanier, Georgia, stand up. Black Wall Street, stand up. Seneca Village, stand up, right? So now when you get the infrastructure, again, you don't even have access to infrastructure. Plessy versus Ferguson, please stand up, right? So, hey, you can't ride in this rail car. This is a white rail car, and you have separate but equal. And so now you have people living in you have people living in very different Americas, right? So you have one America that's now being elevated through the New Deal and all of this infrastructure and everything that's being built. And then you have another America, for the most part, to include white people who are rural, who are being left behind by all of these new changes, and developments, and you're left to live in squalor, right? Shout out to Mississippi, right? And some of those other states. So everything else is being built up around you or being modernized around you, and you're just sitting there, for the most part, what Dr. King would say, right? The Negro lives on an island of poverty amidst a sea of material prosperity, right? And so now when you want to talk about, why is the community dysfunctional? Why can't we get it together? How come we're fucked up? I've seen all the videos. Are Black people cursed? No, there's nothing wrong with you, right? So when you look at the functions of government through slavery, and then also during the Jim Crow era, you were denied access. You were denied access to this, and if you did get any of it, it will be the crumbs of such thing. Could you bring up, Gigi, the picture of what causes crime?
You just sent that to me, correct?
I sent it to you on. I sent it to
Facebook.
You on. Yeah.
Okay. Let me download it here, and it should be coming in 1, 2, 3. I want to have takeoff. Hold on. Should have takeoff in now.
Okay, yeah, it's coming. So voila, causes of crime, right? And so, again, so this the causes of crime.
Pookie.
Yeah. You're saying
Pookie.
So you again. So shout out to you niggas just don't know how to act, right? So again, if you put any group of people in these circumstances, this is what's going to happen, right? So now, again, right, you're talking about industrialization, immigration is happening, and all these things. So what America is experiencing, again, rapid population growth, right? And so now you're getting other groups of European immigrants who are coming into America. They're being discriminated against because remember, they're not bought into the fold of white yet, right? However, once they come in, they do understand, according to the caste system, that they're still elevated above these people who are called Black, who have been here for hundreds of years before them, right? And so when you get to lack of social welfare and lack of capital, right? So even when you get to the Freedmen's Bureau, even when you get to things of like, the things of like the Black people who are Seminoles or members of other Native American tribes, being pushed out of benefits for Native Americans. But then, you would have white people who could slide $5 under the table, right? Never been affiliated with an Indian tribe, not a drop of Indian blood with you. And then voila, right? So lack of social welfare, lack of capital, right? Then you get the political neglect, right? Shout out to, what was that woman's name? Senator Margaret Griffith, right? Who said, again, when they slid it in there, right, on the Civil Rights Amendment, and they added the word, and then they will go and add the word sex in it, right? And then you get Nixon, just jumping around a little bit, where you get to the policy of benign neglect, right? And then, and now we're scratching our heads and we're wondering why we got young people tearing up cities all across America because they're dissatisfied. But hey, what you get is these people just don't know how to act, and they are dysfunctional. Again.
Yeah, and to highlight that, because it's what we said earlier, the average person doesn't need to know anything about this. So from their purview, their understanding of reality is everybody I know, if they tried, they made it. So what's your problem? And it's just really speaking to that ignorance that was really cultivated here. And again, there's a portion of this that does come down to personal accountability. But you need to understand that at a certain point, that crosses over to systematic once a critical threshold is met. Once you've got over 33% of the people on some BS, guess what? The BS is the new meta now. It is an upward trend, and it's become the new norm. And this is why you have systems in place to address these things, so you can analyze not the people per se, but the environment that's creating the people that is encouraging the behavior that you want to discourage, so that you can put it in alignment with an agenda that's conducive to your objective or your mission.
Yes.
One of the things that, to me, that is quite astounding and that stupefies me, there's several things that do, but this is another thing that does, is that, we keep having a conversation about nature and nurture. Is it the environment, or is it subjective individual behavior, right? And how much of each is the main catalyst for dysfunction, right? And I think that, like any sensible sociologist, any politician, any, ethical thinker is going to have to say that it's both, okay? Like there's a constant feedback loop between individual subjective behavior and the environments in which individuals live, okay? But suffice it to say that if the environment is such that it's not conducive to flourishing and functioning, you're going to have what's called anomie. It's going to occur, okay? And look, Carter G. Woodson a long time ago, and I want to bring this, because you said, let's talk about government. What makes it effective, okay? And what is the role of the state, okay? And then also, what is the role of a citizen related to the state, okay? And one of the things that we know is that, first of all, Black people in the United States prior to emancipation were not perceived to be citizens at all. They were slaves, okay, by and large. And even if they were free, they were not perceived as being full citizens either, in the sense that they weren't able to vote by and large, and they weren't able to hold property by and large. And if they were, only to a minimal degree, but they never were perceived to be in full possession of rights that white people had to respect, okay? We know this, okay?
I'm sorry,
but the point is, you're expecting for people all of a sudden to become statespersons or statesmen who were never intended to be statesmen in the first place. But you're in need of statesmen. It's critical that that people begin to think like statesmen, but everything surrounding them and everything, the environment is not conducive to them being statesmen. Like, for instance, I talk about Ferguson, Missouri quite often. namely that in Ferguson, the vast majority of the population are black. But the vast majority of the state officials are white. The chief of, well, I mean, this has changed recently, I mean, of course, but I mean, you know, one of the reasons that there was this big spillover in Ferguson, Missouri, was because you have a small group of white people who are basically administering unjust laws and exploiting the citizenry of the county areas in the city of St. Louis. Okay, now it's one thing, you know, like, okay, we get that, you know, people have to be fined for traffic violations, okay? We understand it, like, if there are no laws and restrictions and there's no punishment associated with the violation of traffic violations, then, you know, people are just going to do whatever they want to on the roads, okay? However, 70 to 80% of the revenue that they received for the government municipalities were predicated upon traffic violations. That's a problem. You don't see that, you didn't see that hardly anywhere in any part of the country other than in, you know, the North County and the city of St. Louis, okay? That was a problem, and it was creating conflict between the police and the, you know, the state, not the state, but the municipal court or judiciaries, right? It was creating this conflict between them, the police, and the citizenry, and particularly young black people, okay? Because it's usually the young black people who are going to, if anybody's going to buck up against the system, it's going to be those guys, not guys who are 40 years old, 50 years old, because at that point, either you've lost your testosterone or you have too much to lose, okay? You got children, you probably have property, or, you know, people around that age range usually have more to lose than people who are like 20 years old, okay? 25 years old, okay? So they're less conservative, okay? More willing to take risks. But those young guys went ham there because they aren't states, they are not in control of what's going on in their environment. And that's a problem. And even, not but Carter G. Woodson, the person who created the Negro Week, which eventually transmogrified into Black History Month, talked about this. I mean, and he said, look, initially you had all these literacy tests and all kinds of tests that black people had to take in order to vote when they ultimately were given the right to vote, but white Southerners wanted to restrict them from being able to actually exercise the franchise, right? And one of the things he said is, and this is just reading directly from Carter G. Woodson, he says, the effect of such a one-sided system where you have all these tests, right? And rather than stimulating, he says it retards the political education, not only of blacks, but of both races, right? And so he says, the effect of this one-sided system is decidedly bad. One does not realize it until he talks with men and women of these districts who, because of the denial of these privileges, have lost interest in political matters, okay? A book agent working in the plantation area of Mississippi tested knowledge of Negroes of these matters by asking them questions about the local and state government. He discovered that they knew practically nothing in this sphere. It was difficult to find any who knew who was president of the U.S. One meets teachers, physicians, and ministers who do not know the ordinary operation of courts, the functions of the council, jury, or judge, unless such knowledge has come by the bitter experience of having been imposed upon by some tribunal of injustice. In other words, until you're punished, you're coming under the purview of the system for some kind of punitive purpose, right? So he says some of the quote unquote educated Negroes do not pay attention to such important matters as the assessment of property and the collection of taxes, and they do not inform themselves as to how these things are worked out. An influential Negro in the South, then, is one who has nothing to do or say about politics and advises others to follow the same course. So we're not even involved in the state. This is an issue. This is a problem. And the same thing is happening today. Okay? And not to say that political involvement is the end all be all. All right? Because as a philosopher, you know, I've studied political science. And, you know, there are many political scientists who say, just because you have people involved in the political process doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have substantive involvement. You can have token involvement, right? Which is what you have a lot of now, especially when it pertains to intersectionalists. To me, this shit is just the fact that we've actually bought into the idea that representation is anything other than tokenism. I just don't get it, but whatever. So he says, look, the elimination of the Negro from politics then has been most unfortunate. The whites might have profited thereby temporarily, but they showed very little foresight. How the whites can expect to make of the Negroes better citizens by leading them to think that they should have no part in the government of this country is a mystery. To keep a man above vagabondage and crime, he needs, among other things, the stimulus of patriotism. How can a man be patriotic when the effect of his education is to the contrary? This is Carter G. Woodson writing 70 years ago, bro. You want people to be patriotic and to perceive themselves as American citizens, but you're not allowing them to fully participate in the machinations of government in any substantive and significant way. And this is the issue. This is a problem.
And it gets
one of the things I've been trying to discuss with the series I've been doing called Ghetto Ish or Ghetto Shit, okay? Now, let me just say this. I am ghetto if I need to be. That's what the G and the GHP represent. I mean, the G with a PhD represents. Because if I got to become goonish, because you got a bunch of monkeys trying to act hard, then you're going to see that element of my character. I'm not above smacking the shit out of a nigga in his fucking face. I'm not. I don't want to. But if you force me into that kind of behavior, I will go into that groove. I don't want to, but you ever heard the phrase, look at what you made me do? I will go there. But the larger point is, what kind of conditions have obtained in these ghettos such that the denizens who exist within them have the kind of character and have the kind of attitude that they have? Now, one of the things the people in this space tend to do over and over and over again is they just want to fucking scapegoat. Okay, well, it's single bitches, or it's pookies, or it's unproductive men, or it's, it's a whole bunch of different, scapegoats. But there are a constellation of causes of the problem, some of them historical, some of them institutional, and there's a wide variety of institutions. There are familial institutions, educational institutions, political institutions, whether they be executive, legislative, or judicial. There's a constellation of institutions and compound effects of systemic neglect or even just absolute, unforeseen consequences of conjoint action just by people acting without being knowledgeable of the ways that they're acting in deleterious ways, okay, is what I mean by that. So unforeseen products, right, can cause some of this enemy and some of this confusion and some of these problems, okay? So at the end of the day, what I'm saying is we need to become more sophisticated in the way we assess what's going on, and perhaps maybe we need to take the vantage. Well, I think that there's a disconnect here between various men in the space, because there's some people who want to just focus on the subjective features, which are morality and personal responsibility, right? Then there's some people who want to just focus on institutions and systems. But I think that the real solution comes when you look at both of them that they're interconnected and interrelated inextricably. That's how you have to perceive this, okay? It's not just one against the other, okay? It's the conjoint connection between subjective and institutional features and the feedback loops between both of these kinds of processes, okay? To me, this is common sense. You don't have to be a scholar to see this. or to understand this. Like one of the reasons, like even like the conservative scholars like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, okay, they've already come forth and said, look, the reason that you have single motherhood the way that you do now is because it's incentivized by government policy. This is why this behavior is so, abundant. This is why if you want a different outcome, you're going to have to change the policies. You're going to have to change the institutions. You're going to have to change laws. Okay, you're not just going to get an attendant change predicated upon just going out and trying to get people to do what they've never done before, or to think in ways that they've never been forced to think about before. It's not going to happen. Or you're not just going to be able to have videos that are going to change people's minds, or have rap sessions on YouTube and shit. Like we're in a Just Pearly show or some shit. Like we're going to change the minds of the people sitting on the couches or something. Shit ain't going to happen. Okay? And black women are not going to give up government subsidies, okay, that benefit them. They're not going to do it, okay? But I'm not saying that you should just remove all the subsidies from women, but what I'm saying, here's my thing, right? And I've been trying to discuss this. In America, you have a gendered-based treatment of issues related to poverty. Anybody should be able to see this, right? And what the excuse for it is that the nation is trying to take care of children. Okay? Because one can argue children don't deserve to be subjected to injustice. Okay? They're just born where they are. They didn't ask to be here. They're here because of the sexual contributions of both of their parents. Whether for right or for wrong, whether it was responsible or irresponsible. Okay? They're here. So because they're here and they're vulnerable and they're not old enough to make competent decisions and to be autonomous, we have to ensure that somebody takes care of them, okay? Even if their parents fail to do so, they still have to be taken care of. We can't just let them fucking starve, okay? Maybe a grown person we can let starve, but a child we can't. But here's the catch. We've given over the custody of children primarily to women, okay? So they're the stewards of children, so they're going to get the handouts. This is the way we've handled the problem of poverty in the United States, especially when it comes or pertains to black poverty. Now, this didn't happen during the New Deal. When poverty was discussed amongst the European immigrant population of the United States, man, FDR went all out, man. He held no stops, man. There are documentaries. You need to watch these documentaries on FDR going to Appalachia and basically hobnobbing with the poor white citizens. He went and talked and associated with those people, man. And he was like, well, look, we need to find a way to uplift them. We need to find a way to enfranchise these people, okay? Politically and economically. And the New Deal basically ushered in a middle class. Now, there are some people who have been resisting against that trend from day one and thought it was a bad idea from fucking day one. Right now, they're like, oh, well, shit, they're trying to get rid of fucking Social Security now. Okay? But my thing is, you can't gender poverty. You can't treat poverty through gender through gender favoritism. The shit is stupid. It's been dumb from the beginning. Okay? Now, if we can find a way to enfranchise those people who we know that America has basically marginalized, okay? And if it doesn't happen, you're going to continue to get the kind of negative feedback loops you're getting. And I just don't see why America continues to insist, on behaving the way it does when it comes to black folks, especially and here's another thing that really fucks me up, right? It kind of gets my goat. You are aware of the migration patterns of Africans to the United States, right? I'm asking both of y'all. You are aware of this, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
So for the most part, black people in America came from West Africa, right?
Yeah. Correct. Western
Okay?
Central.
Western Central Africa. So, I mean, there's only about 4 or 5 predominant tribes that black people came from Africa and migrated to the Americas, okay? There were several stops. Many of the people went to, you know, Jamaica, Saint Domingue, or Haiti, or whatever you want to call it, and Brazil, and, you know, then they came to the United States, okay? Because this is further away from you know, Africa proper. You know, you got to go through these other spots before you get to the U.S., okay? Typically, right? So here's the thing that kills me, right? Black people were more concentrated in the South prior to the emancipation, right? Or am I wrong about this?
No, that's how we got that's how we got the Great Migration. Yeah.
Yes.
So black people were more concentrated in the South than they were in the North, correct?
Correct.
So the people who went to the North primarily came from the South, did they not?
Yep.
They were primarily the same stock of people. They're the same population group, right? Meaning they're not like a radical, they're not a different caste of persons, like genetically, culturally, or anything else, right?
Definitely not.
Prior to their migration to urban cities, correct?
Indeed.
Or maybe they're a different genetic group. Or am I fucked up?
No, there's an argument many are making with the Native American conversation, but by and large, individuals whose ancestors were part of the transatlantic slave trade that were here post 1776, yeah, we're all part of the same camp at that
We're
point.
the same group of people, man. So all of this, there's some good niggas, there's some bad niggas, there's some uppity niggas, I'm not them niggas. I'm just tired of hearing that stupid shit, bro. Now we can talk about how cultural location, like this is what this chart is telling me, okay? Like, okay, black people have different environments that they've been subjected to since their influx as a population into the United States to serve as slave labor, okay? It's just the truth, right? They've been subjected to various experiences predicated upon the various states that they were slaves in, and whether or not they lived in the South or they lived in the North, whether they were free or bondsmen, right? We already know this, okay? But we do know that by and large, the bulk of the population of black folks in the United States are from 4 or 5 different fucking tribes in Africa who basically were brought across the transatlantic to work in perpetual bondage to make white people rich, and who eventually moved from various parts of the South, which was a caste system based on violence and tyranny. The KKK, right? They would fucking hang you from a tree and burn a cross in front of your house. They would fucking cut your nuts off and consume them in order to gain greater vitality and vigor for themselves. This is all documented, okay? They would eat your gonads for power, okay? So black people, any black people who basically had common sense and didn't want to experience what the fuck was going on in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and these other places, they basically migrated to the North and the Midwest in search of a better life for themselves, right? So what ends up happening? They get corralled into ghettos by white people in the Midwest and in the North who they thought would be much more progressive, but who really weren't any more progressive at all than the white people in the South. They were just as hostile, okay? Now, the only thing that kills me about black folks, man, in the United States is that we've begun to act as if within 150 years that there's like this total fucking difference between various black folks in the United States. Like this humongous cultural and genetic or even like a phenotypic difference. Like it's just like the Negroes in one city or one, area or one state are just so much different than the others. We all come from the same fucking place by and large. I mean, all you gotta do is look at the history books. This is not rocket science, bro. But how we end up like creating all of these fucking caste systems, I understand the human need to create in and out groups. I get it. I understand it. I get it. I'm aware of it. I get it. I understand it. People need to create identities and they have to have affiliations. They have to find a way to circumscribe affiliation for purposes of security and usefulness. But I think that we're going like, first of all, a group of people who don't have any idea of statesmanship or creating these goddamn arbitrary castes among themselves, and to what end? Like, I don't have a problem with people creating differentiations amongst each other. But I mean, come on, like the kind of superficial distinctions we're making amongst ourselves is, to me, it's insane. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, bro. You got a group of people who don't know how the state operates. And increasingly, white people don't know how the state operates, bro. Or am I missing something?
No.
I mean, you haven't been in charge of educating white people, most of y'all. I have been. And I'm going to tell you the truth. A lot of these white people at these schools, at these universities, they're just as lost as the average Negro population, bro. Ask these motherfuckers, ask them who to, even go watch the YouTube videos, bro. Watch them. Where they ask, name 3 Supreme Court justices. I guarantee the average citizen will not fucking be able to do it, man. 3 of them. Scalia, Alito, fucking Thomas, Roberts, they don't fucking know. They just don't know. If you ask the average citizen, okay, who is the vice president? They know who the president is more than likely. But the vice president, I guarantee you, out of 50 people, I guarantee you a 10th of those people won't even know who the fuck the vice president is. They might not even know who their own governor is. Or their own treasurer is. I mean, I'm speaking the truth. They might not even know who their senators are. Or even 3 or 4 of their representatives. They might not even know. So at the end of the day, man, like increasingly, I'm gonna tell you what white people do. As soon as black people begin to be inducted into a practice or an institution, they nullify the substance of the institution in and of itself. And thereby attenuate the purposefulness of having, been inaugurated into the institution or the practice itself. Or they add other people to it such that it becomes nugatory for having been added to it in the first place. Like, take, for example, the Civil Rights Act to begin with. I don't have an issue with the Civil Rights Act. Or, like, even, I don't know if I was, having this conversation with you all, but I know I was having a conversation with somebody. It might have been Marcus, right? And I'm talking about keep it 100. That there's this, I think even in this space, there's this juxtaposition of the usefulness of either the attitude of like a William Burghardt Du Bois or Booker T. Right? There's like this, well, what should have been the path? And even from the outset, bro, and this, look, I don't have a problem with Booker T. Washington and what he was trying to accomplish. I think the way he went about doing it was fucked up. Okay? Now, shout out to Booker T, but the way he went about it was fucked up. Let me tell you what Booker T did, bro. Okay? This is what Booker T. Washington did, bro. This motherfucker, man, sent spies to infiltrate the Niagara movement. You know what the Niagara movement was, right? You ever heard of that? It was the movement that W.B. Du Bois was trying to start.
Yeah.
And it was all predicated upon making sure that black people had civil rights, meaning that they could actually be citizens. Booker T was like, we don't need to do that. That's dangerous. These white people are hostile out here. We need to keep our head down and do us. and try to find ways to have a self-sustaining internal black community, okay? But where he went wrong to me was, dude, don't send spies to my shit. Just do your thing, bro. You don't have to send spies to my organization so you can keep tabs on what the fuck I'm doing. That's like some FBI, CIA shit. Then not only did he do that, I'm talking about Booker T. Washington. Not only did he do that, he paid newspapers to criticize the Niagara movement and to ostracize anybody who was taking part in it. So you're gonna pay to basically throw salt on the shit, the work and the organizing I'm trying to do on behalf of black folks, because you don't see value in it, you don't like the position, so you're gonna try to sabotage it? I don't have a problem with people having a difference of opinion, but to me, that's ultimately disrespectful. That's some bitch nigga shit to me. If you don't like what I'm vibing on, do your own thing. Why is what I'm doing a threat to what you're doing? How come they both can't exist within the same domain of blackness? White people are not a monolith in terms of politics. Why do you expect black folks to be?
Messiah complexes, man. Again,
Booker T. Washington had a fucking Messiah complex for real. I'm just keeping it a buck, okay? And then, not only did Washington pay newspapers to criticize the Niagara movement, wherever white people Washington had contact with, he basically used them in order to shut out people who supported the Niagara movement by ensuring that they were excluded from federal appointments and jobs. Like, we're gonna obstruct. To me, it's one thing to be in opposition to an idea. It's another thing to engage in subterfuge, man. And this is some shit Washington did. And that, to me, I'm just keeping it a buck. I can agree with some of the stances he took, but to me, that's bitch nigga shit. That's tantamount to saying, okay, I don't like this nigga channel, so I'm gonna put ads and negative commentary out there like the MOT nigga does. Let me just start disparaging everybody around so I can get motherfuckers to rally on my cause. That's bitch nigga shit to me, man. I'm just keeping it a buck. So I have no problem with people having differences of opinion, but don't try to sabotage other people's shit because they not in agreement with you or they got a different vibe. That's that Messiah complex shit. It is the megalomaniac, I'm the head nigga in charge type of attitude that guys take, and it's predicated upon their own, perception of their own superiority. Or their inability to actually work as a statesman would actually work to begin with. Because a statesman, if you are a statesman, you understand that you are an individual part of a collective. You're not the sum total of the fucking state unless you're a dictator. In a republic, a representative democracy, right? A republic, a federal republic, you don't get to fucking call shots by yourself. I mean, I think American politics is fucked up anyway, to be quite honest. The way people mudsling and the shit they do, to me, it's bullshit.
Facts.
I'm just keeping it a buck. I don't care what white boys do. They can go off on each other and insult each other all day. And I don't have a problem with insulting motherfuckers either if you get in, if you want to get froggy and start leaping, okay? But at the end of the day, man, all that muck raking and all the mud slinging and all the, the negative shit, man, cut it out, bro. We're not really actually in a position to be engaging in that kind of behavior in a constructive way. But guys want to do that shit so much. And that's that bitch assness to me. I hate to say it, that's some bitch ass shit that Booker T. Washington was on. Don't knock my hustle, get your own. But they went back and forth. You know, I'm just some bullshit the W.E.B. Du Bois did. Okay? But all that old back and forth, like, I'm not trying to relive out and rehash out old ideological differences between niggas with messiah complexes, man. I'm not on that, bro. You understand what I mean? I'm not on that bullshit, bro.
Yeah.
So we need to, like, and if we're gonna start actually being statespersons, we gotta do stately shit. And one of the issues, and this is one of the things I've been bringing up on the series that I'm doing now. And the brother who wrote the book, he's a PhD at Harvard. His name is Tommy Shelby. Ultimately, what he says is, look, every society has a basic structure, a government, right? A state. Every state has a basic structure, right? There are institutions that it has. There are economic institutions, there are political, and there are social institutions. These institutions can be more or less fair in the way that they distribute benefits and burdens to all of the citizens that are, you know, members of whatever society that they exist in, right? They can be more or less fair. But damn, if you don't have the capacity to control any of the institutions at all or to influence the decision making in any of the institutions, you are definitely subjected to arbitrary rule by other people. When has that ever been American? To be arbitrarily ruled by somebody else?
Never.
I mean, from its inception, it was like, you're fucking taxing me and not allowing me to have a voice. Wasn't that the initial argument for reason to go to war? You're making me pay, but you're not allowing me a voice. You might not like my voice, but you can't obstruct it. That's the first freedom that we have in the United States is what? What's the first freedom? What's the first amendment?
Yeah, free speech.
Now you have niggas in the manosphere trying to stop niggas from talking. I'm done, bro. I'm gonna let y'all pick this up, man. I got on the soapbox real quick. But
it goes back to what BGS said, man. You're talking about who educates your kids, right? So again, this is something called continuity. And so what, having a dysfunctional or broken community is something that for damn sure will impact your continuity, right? So again, it's like I said, so the Black Panthers in 1981, 82, right? Sandog is at PS 81, Thaddeus Stevens Elementary School. And, I'm going to a nice redhead lady with curly hair, right? And so she's not gonna sit down and teach me about all of this again, because the state hasn't mandated her to teach it. What the state said is that I need to know math, I need to know social studies, I need to know science, I need to study English, and I get 30 minutes a day to play with the He-Man doll that I snuck to school. So
you don't even get they didn't even took recess out of schools for real.
Wow. So yeah. So this is what I'm trying to say. So now what happens is, again, America, you have it, America is this plantation / corporate model, of living. So you're talking about, you like things like raising kids and all of that other kind of stuff, man. That is extremely different, because now if your kids spend more time at public school per se than they spend with you, then the state is raising your children, right? And so whatever trap that they're going to fall into, or whatever agenda the state has for them, that is ultimately, where you're going to go. And so it goes to the fact that if you're African American, your political rhetoric or your words have to now change in order for you to manipulate the system to get to get what you to get what you need from it.
My only problem with the way that these white folks and even some black folks, even conservative black folks, talk about what black people deserve. Negroes pay taxes, don't they? I mean, there are Negroes that own homes. When they own them, they pay taxes, right?
Correct.
When you go buy a bag of chips at the local bodega or the gas station, if you're like at a convenience mart or something like that in an urban area, you're paying taxes, right?
Yeah. But here's the point. This is everything that's been said. I've been trying to highlight that from the very onset for that same reason and why I describe it as a caste. Because even when you boil it down to looking at individuals classified as black in aggregate, there is still a distinction when you talk about anyone with the Y chromosome. And I don't think this is appreciated enough. I think it gets glossed over. I think because people can readily identify with the American aggregate idea, the manufactured idea, not even really, the average person doesn't know the three branches of government. I mean, I think I was on an arts panel when I talked about this. I posted a link where they went through these colleges. I think it was sometime early last year. And they were just asking college campuses at, was it Princeton? It was an Ivy League college. What the three branches of government were, and folks didn't know.
Man, stop. You get, no, bro. I don't believe that, man.
Okay, I'll go find it later and I'll post that to you.
But, I mean, folks didn't know. You know what?
Didn't know what the three branches were. It wasn't even like...
I can believe it and I don't believe it. But one of the reasons why I believe it is because because I taught at a prestigious Jesuit university, okay? And some of the kids there were sharp as a tack, okay? Don't get it twisted. But a lot of them were just aloof and didn't know. And at a state school in Texas, oh my God, bro. I'm not trying to hate on the kids in the South, man, but these motherfuckers, man, I swear to God, bro.
But it's why I said what I said in the very onset. They don't need to know this because they're carried by the cultural inertia of their classification. And that's really what I'm highlighting here. If we don't have a cultural profile of what it means to be a American who happens to be black that is male, we don't have anything outside of the plantation model to refer and defer to. Everything we've tried to do has been done in spite of that model. That has served as the thesis to which our antithesis is expressed and measured against, which is why anybody that acts outside of that has to be either a representation of God or a representation of what was acceptable in that plantation model. Outside of that, you're a renegade, you're a runaway, you're a maroon, you've got drapetomania. And irrespective of how you want to phrase that or look at it, I want you to pay attention specifically to how our demographic represents probably one of the smallest demographics in the country, but has the greatest level of resources dedicated to making sure we stay here, whether it be ideologically or physically, usually both, every single time. And if we understand this idea of institution building, I'm going to go out and make my sexist statement for the day, and I'll wait for people to present the rebuttal towards it. I can't find an institution that wasn't approved of or agreed for by men, starting and ending. And even if you look at a lot of female institutions, a lot of them exist on the behest of the men that were there. As a result, when it comes to black men, we are the one group of men who other groups of men do not approve of having institutions of, more particularly other groups of black men as well. Meaning, we have this interesting modality of thought that, again, I place at the feet of the plantation, where we don't know how to work together as men to establish institution because we already identify with others that don't even look like us. And when we do, We only do so in very specific micro capacities in other spaces that have been carved out by other people. We don't have a culture that I don't want to use this word, but I challenge anybody to find another group of people who have this and have been successful, or rather who don't have this and have been successful. A safe space for Black men to communicate with each other. And I mean that word safe space, because safe and trust go hand in hand. I challenge you to find a difference between safe and trust. And if you don't have safe and trust, you can't have institution. I don't care what scale you want to build that institution under. And this is really just a runoff of what we see in the space as a macrocosm, really. Anywhere you go. And this is where we get into why we have our nature aspect on autopilot, where we make things so extreme to either the environment, as we said before, or this artificialism created by culture and control, when reality doesn't work that way. Reality works with the mutual contribution of both. It's like what we learned this in martial arts. It's the whole principle of the yin yang and the Tao. If you are all instinct and no control, you will be beat by systems every time. If you're all control and no instinct, then anyone with a sense of instinct will pick up your pattern and intercept you. Right. You have to combine the two harmoniously, just like Bruce Lee said. But it's facts. If you take both and marry the two together and express them as the same modality, you get nowhere. And that's essentially with anything having to do with reality, even systems. You'll be surprised now. You can point to major corporation to major corporation. They have to find a balance between corporate interest and what the base of their customer actually wants. And every major corporation right now that's suffering, whether it be choose your field outside of maybe utilities, especially in the entertainment field, or anything that's being consumed on a commercial basis that has competition. Every corporation that only focused on bottom line has gone belly under. And if they have not gone belly under, it's because they have made dramatic changes in reforms to the way in which they engage their customer base.
Wow.
You have to have both. But again, getting back to our issue is individuals that are classified as Black in America with a Y chromosome. Our lack of trust for each other didn't happen in a vacuum, but it is the only way we get to a point where we build institution, even if it's loose, even if it's a coven that says, look, I'm Black, you Black, anti-bullshit because of what we've been through, agree to go our separate ways. That would produce more neutral ground to maybe at a later date establish safety and trust so that we can build in an environment where we are literally outnumbered.
You have to agree that that's what it means to be Black, though. That people don't have an agreement with what it means to be Black.
Rogish, I want to ask her, that's basically because when you get to operational diplomacy, and we like to throw around the word coon and sellout, right? And it goes back to just what you said. What are you selling out? What established principles or agenda do we have that exists that you're selling out?
I don't know. What if we establish that Black is?
But that's just it. Black is the shadow of white, like we said before. Right. And so when we get into understanding that we're in an odd man out scenario, we are a synthetically forced and pressed together group.
Right, Johnny Five shit. So how much of a Johnny Five situation are we attempting to engage ourselves in with attempting to get adequate citizenry of this nation? And is the way that they keep it away, is that objective or is it subjective? And is it tribally subjective? If that's the case, how can anything dealing with, let's say that the route that a citizen takes, how can an artificial being take the route of a citizen and yet things that's going to get citizen value?
here's what we have to understand. Number one, systems. And it's why I got into Sword Form 5, where I talked about the difference between force and power.
Right.
How, as an individual, you can command force and make moves with timing. But individuals that have power do so systematically over time, so that over time, they can subvert force in mass. So because we don't have an agenda, because we don't have a group we can identify each other with, and everybody else is treating us as though we are a group, but we don't identify with our own group or the means by which we've been classified, we literally are powerless in the most powerful system on planet Earth. We can aggregate force, and you can do so by utilizing the systems, but you have to understand the lay of the environment. You need intelligence to make that happen. You have to have people on the same page working at the same time to make that work. But go ahead.
But this is what black people do, right? Instead of creating the institution and allowing the institution to be the institution to be the site in which collective decision making is made, you get a whole bunch of people who are pre-dedicated or pre-committed to an ideology, and they fight with each other over who's going to be the boss.
Right, through proxy.
That's not how an institution actually works. Like even like, say for example, the legislature of any city, or any state, you're gonna have different people with different opinions who don't like each other, the whole nine, okay? But the institution exists so collective decision making can get made within the context of it. Okay? Isn't
the will of fire the boss of Konoha? Isn't the will of fire?
Well, here's the issue. We don't have a village under which we were brought up under, because we see all of America as that, and as far as we're concerned, we're done. But that's the thinking that the majority of white Americans in the dominant society have. Again, we don't have the same cultural inertia everyone else in America does.
No, they don't. But Nameless, you mean to tell me we haven't developed a history of developing the principle of our particular will? Come on, cuz. Really?
Okay, that's not what I'm talking about.
I'm going to tell you why.
Go ahead.
I'm going to tell you why. Look. All men everywhere create institutions, bro. It happens. Whether the institutions are respected or they're not respected, whether the institutions are perceived as criminal or whether they're perceived as respectable, you know what I'm saying? Or like law abiding, right? So like, for example, you might not like it, but like the blood is a fucking institutions, man. It's a fucking game.
Facts.
Yep.
Now you might not think that the goal of the institution is noble. It's not. Okay? But it is an institution. The church is an institution.
Yeah.
Okay? To a certain extent, all right? But the problem with black folks is that they don't have institutions that lead to punishment or death.
Okay. Yeah.
That's just the facts, man. Like, okay, you go to a white court, like when Tory Lanez, Megan Thee Stallion, all them motherfuckers went in that court, they know that you can get your ass locked up behind some bars for decades.
Yeah.
Motherfuckers got suits on and they quiet like a motherfucker, right? They not in there acting an ass or a donkey, right?
It ain't gang in there.
No, ain't no gang slang. The island boy, ain't none of that. Motherfuckers acting cool, calm, and collected with some respect, right?
Copacetic, yes, sir.
The problem is that black folks don't have the capacity, and they want the ability to do this,
right?
But like with individual subjectivity, okay? Like, I'm gonna boss everybody around and I'm gonna be the judge. Dog, the shit don't work like that.
Right.
Because first of all, you need to be appointed by a competent jurisdiction in order to be a judge or an assessor of human beings. And there has to be a system of laws that make you accountable as a judge such that your partiality is not something that comes into play as you are engaging in the sentencing or, like the evaluation of somebody's status as to whether or not they're going to be incarcerated or just punished, socially or whatever the case may be. There has to be a set of procedures, right? Such that there's not excessiveness related to punitiveness, okay? There are attorneys that understand these things. I'm not saying that there aren't black attorneys that get it, okay? And they're not involved in the system of jurisprudence. But we don't have an authentically black system of jurisprudence.
But you get
we don't have, look, and this is where the plantation shit comes in.
Right.
White people have a system of punishment. They can punish you. They can send you to prison. They can hang you. They can kill you. They can stop you from getting money. They have a whole bunch of systems in place to do it. The problem is you have none. You don't have any. And without having the ability to punish, to judge, and to condemn, you have no power. How are you going to get anybody to do what the fuck you demand or what you say is supposed to happen if you're not, there's not any fucking judges or people willing to execute the judgment?
Wow. Damn.
Now
I understand where assassins came from. The
there
farmers,
is,
remember?
like my man Salchi has it right. There is no authority in the black community except for mine.
And that's
a childish form of authority because the only power that they have is over kids.
Yeah.
But that's the key here. It's why I said at the end of the day, there's no authority, thus no responsibility. And if you can't have responsibility because there's no authority, all you have is a system of delegation of liability. And it's no different than car insurance theory. So we're back again to how do you, and it's why I called Black a corporation that is a subsidiary of America. And as long as you're in this subsidiary position and all your CEOs and all your executive board members are elected to you, you can't function in this modality to get the policies you want, which is arguably independent state talk and or citizen engagement. You can get token citizenship. Yeah, you're born here, you pay taxes, etc. But it's citizens who build institutions to engage in the political system, specifically a democratic system that's in place here. That is the issue at hand. So long as you aren't engaged in the political system, if you aren't able to assert rewards and punishments, you're no different than a slave or invisible. You are, tell me the difference, functionally speaking, between a plantation and the prison system as it stands. What's the difference? I'm serious. What is the difference? And if there's no difference, how is it any different then from the way it was in the North with the overwhelming threat of being, quote, sent down south if you acted out?
Right.
What was the difference? It's the same system. So if we've got the same system, it bred the same culture in the same environment, you're going to get the same modality because it was the women on the plantation that ran it. Big Mama and them, Cletus and them, that was the plantation authority. And it all boiled down to who's going to be the head nigga in charge. That's how you get that damn term. And we recreate the plantation everywhere we go because that is the cultural inertia of being here, which is why the moment we leave this place, the moment we leave this influence and we get treated like men who happen to be Black Americans who happen to be Black when we go abroad, for example. That's where that comes from. That's where that comes from.
Well put.
So this is going back to the issue of we don't trust our own image. And we don't because it's not culturally taught to us. We don't have a cultural modality to do so. We've been raised to trust our mothers more specifically, and Big Mama as an archetype above all else. Above all else. Yeah, you give lip service to the idea of Papa. Shout out to Black Uru. But at the end of the day, it's Big Mama that has the authority because what she says at the end of the day is how that goes. And behind her is Massa. And the problem is,
the problem is with that. I mean, there is a system of authority in America. Okay. The problem is that we don't have an internal system of authority for ourselves. Right. That's the problem. Okay.
Right. But you need that to engage, right? How can you engage in this process without it?
But the first thing, okay, is that look, the first thing you have to understand is that the institutions have to do the heavy lifting, and that big and powerful and charismatic men is not enough. Like, we're going to have to move beyond that model. Okay? But I don't think Negroes are really actually willing to let it go, because, like, if you look at black culture, it's all about the charismatic man. The homoerotic, charismatic motherfucking, the pimp. It's the peacock nigga.
Hey, did I hear somebody playing Phaso in the background?
Well, that was just my alarm going off. But yeah.
Yeah, Phaso on your alarm.
No, that's an old joint. I forget the name of that joint, but it's
Riding High. That's Riding High, Phaso.
Yeah, Ride High. So
I know my phone. I know my phone, Doc.
Right. So, but at any rate, what I'm trying to, like, not to say that the white people don't have their charismatic figures and demagogues, because they do. Okay? Not to say that they don't exist, they do. Like, for example, like, Hegel says, look, and if any philosopher is emblematic of, in the Western tradition, especially recently, if anybody is emblematic of the importance of institutions, is this guy. Okay, he basically says, look, you can't depend on charismatic men. Now, sometimes reason, and his whole, to him, they call it German idealism, okay, with this tradition that Hegel's a part of. And he believed that there's something called Geist that's manifesting itself through the history of the Western world, such that the reason is becoming to know itself and to become more and more refined and to culminate in, it's like God coming to know itself or some shit like that. Okay, I mean, he's not the first person to have an ideal like this in any kind of like esoteric tradition, but this is some European German manifestation or articulation of it. Okay, so the idea is that God is coming to know itself through and working itself through history, through either great men or through more accurately through institutions. Where the spirit is coming to know itself and refining and perfecting itself and reflecting and looking back on itself so that it can understand itself and become more refined and perfect, or whatever the case may be. Of course, it's some white elitist shit, because it all culminates in the Germanic state, which is some bullshit to me. Which, eschatologically, I think that's some bullshit, okay?
They always try to project humanity as being something that it's not. And it's like, yo, you gotta understand the connection.
Well, they try to project themselves as being at the center of it.
Right. Yeah. Thermodynamics would have a word with that shit, but go ahead, fam.
but at the end of the day, but he understood, though, that the state is that body, and the state is nothing but an agglomeration of institutions.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, am I lying about this, Sandog?
No, you're right.
I'm trying to find. I don't know if Sandog is still with us.
I'm here.
I mean, cells form a system, right? Go ahead.
Yeah.
but the whole point is that the institutions are the things that make up what a state actually is, and it has to, unless the state is ruled by dictators. Even a dictator is going to be, to some degree, accountable to somebody, because it's going to be somebody trying to check his power. Or he might get fucking killed by some other person who's, through machination, it's like, fuck this nigga. He's overstepping his bounds.
Are you speaking of a state still connected to its public culturally, or just the fact that it's the governing body over a public?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, look back at history, okay? Like you typically, like even in America today, even in a corporation, right? There are, even in the American colonies, you had governors, correct?
Right.
And also there were like these bodies of persons within, the context of the governor. There were people that he had to answer to a certain degree, right? Investors and other ministers of the corporation to help to keep it moving smoothly, right? To keep generating a profit, correct? Or am I wrong about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there were boards.
The board.
There were boards that kind of, checked the arbitrary power of the governor to some degree.
But at one point, did the governor, how this nation governed itself, did it actually reflect its public constituency? Or has it always been the private sector?
Well, I mean, It all depends on who you perceive the public. Black people were never part of the public.
I ain't counting us, cuz. Come on now.
I'm just
again,
keeping it a
exceptions to the rule, right? But to his point, like, again, you got to look at how we start. There's still that system of accountability that's there. And even when you look at other groups that come over here, they brought their system over here, set up camp, established a perimeter, and they were able to compete. The biggest example I can think of that is the small hats. I mean, they did the exact
Jews,
same thing.
Exactly. But here's the thing. They have an autochthonous religious tradition that is centered around legality.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Or jurisprudence, right? But in particular, religious jurisprudence. Okay. Which entails, I mean, because look, let's face it, until recently, until the Protestant Reformation, there was no separation between the church and the state.
Mm-hmm.
Fact.
Okay? So the church embodied, the religious traditions embody statecraft by default.
Okay. Okay, so how are the other institutions not?
I mean, look at the
you.
continent. Look at the continent. Look at the Zulu. Yeah. Look at the way rulership still has, and even though they had, I don't know what you call it when there's like when you get a kind of seniority by age, but either way, you know, a lot of it's a pattern to have the religion as a precursor to determining and influencing state decisions. And when I say state, we're talking about the institutions that govern well-being, power, and the dissemination of rewards and punishments. I mean, you can look at the creation of any major empire on the continent. It followed the same pattern. You look at a majority of the modalities that exist today, even in Asia, you know, it's still there. So they're taking their social cues, their cultural cues from that religion like it's a seed, and then it branches off into the way other institutions revolve and adapt to the changing times. When you had people able to educate themselves on the religion, yeah, that changed the trajectory, in particular for the West, because they were making up a lot of nonsense and using it to control people. But when you look at the way it's playing out now, it's kind of the same thing. The only difference is the school system, by way of who controls the material the school system is using, is doing the exact same thing now. So it's producing these masses of people who grow up being trained and conditioned to go work at some job somewhere rather than engage in the political process and be a citizen, which is related to statecraft ultimately. You are a cog in that wheel, but you're participating in the overall structure. Instead, you've been hijacked and placed into the cog of a corporation so that you can continue to make them profits so that they in turn can engage in the political process in your stead.
Yeah, like look, let me just say this, right? And then I'm gonna let you talk, Bennington, okay? Or Ben Cannon, I think that's your name, Ben Cannon, right?
Ben Cannon.
Ben Cannon, or Ben Cannon. I mean, I can't talk like you talk. Yes. You sound like you're from Jamaica.
Ben Cannon.
Okay.
I'm from Israel.
From Israel? Okay. Shout out to you, bro. Well, one of the things I was gonna say is this, bro. All of the professors that I used to, rock with made a distinction between the market and the form, between modern politics and ancient politics. And what they basically have been essentially arguing is that, like, the market model that arises out of modernity is insufficient for true or substantive self-governance, or, for true autonomy. Okay. Now you can't actually replicate exactly what was going on in ancient times. The societies are too large. Okay. And the kind of, coordination that needs to take place within the context of a metropolitan city like New York is going to be much more complex than what the fuck needed to occur in ancient Athens. Okay. So a city-state like with about 80,000 to 150,000 people is much different than a fucking major metroplex in contemporary society that, has 8 million citizens in it. Okay? It's different, okay? Like the amount of bureaucracy is going to be different because you need a lot of systems that are working in conjunction with each other, and you can't have any lapses, right? Like just imagine if the sanitation system is down for 2 or 3 days, what would happen to New York? What if the transportation system were to collapse for 4 or 5 days in the city of New York? What would occur?
It was called chaos because the flow is too sensitive. It's way too sensitive a flow of how they're accustomed to living and not only getting money, but also living in the lifestyle that they purport. It would jack up a lot of stuff. You know, so it's like trying to ride in the fast lane. Going 60 and everything.
But my larger point is this: there's no way to get rid of bureaucracy altogether. But the point is, in order to really actually maintain efficiency, you need more than just a group of technocrats and bureaucrats who are utilizing a top-down structure. Because there's going to be what they call epistemic blind spots. The people who are in the top, if they don't come down out of the tower, they can't really actually see what's going down on the ground. If they don't take feedback or information from what's going on the ground, they're not going to actually be able to effectively keep productivity and efficiency going the way it ought to be. Anybody who runs a business should know this shit. Right?
Yeah, but if you got an efficient entertainment system, you don't have to pay attention. It just runs itself. The programming, keeps the baby in the crib. What they call that shit? The baby look at it in the crib and it spins around. That's what the entertainment system is. And people actually live and worship by it. So the top really don't have to really be that concerned. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they ought to be concerned.
They are ants. You know what I'm saying? Somebody wrote that.
These people ought to be concerned because let me tell you, man, look, no society lasts forever, okay?
Yeah. No,
it just doesn't.
Society lasts forever.
No society, no culture. Rome fell. Fuck, one time England was at the top. You know, they ruled the world. They fucking ruled the 7 seas, okay? They don't do it any longer, okay? Babylon fell. Though. Egypt fell, okay? Ethiopia fell, okay? Like that, nobody runs it forever. Nobody's in control of this shit forever. Now, having some semblance of feedback loops from the top to the bottom might be able to preserve it or prolong it. But like deep stratification and animosity predicated upon in-group, out-group conflicts over time, that's not a way to sustain a culture, man. Either you're going to have to commit acts of genocide in order to subvert the internal opposition, or you're going to have to find a way to acclimate people, to agglomerate and to eventually mix. Like, BGS say we ultimately, people becoming acclimated. I don't see it, but, my larger point is we need better feedback loops. And people need to stop being so fucking selfish. Like, at the end of the day, all the ancient fairy tales and the tales from mythology give warnings to economic stratification, man. Mm-hmm. Even in the Bible, it's like, look, don't be selfish to the extent to where you can't help out people who are less fortunate than yourself, man.
Yes, we do. We have laws.
So it speaks about essential humanity element of humanity then that you must, as you gain, I guess, in wealth, sophistication, technology, whatever, it's a yo-yo effect with it. You know what I'm saying? You're not supposed to attend, primarily just to the side of progress, because it could, I guess, erode certain elements of you being connected to this world. And when you just become a mouth, I mean, right now, everything is just consumption. So it's like, I don't really think is the racial component. Yeah, it is what it is. But the fact that everyone is becoming a mouth, and no matter what the racial component is within their systems, that's going to be the end result of the system, no matter how they feel about niggas. you know what I'm saying? That's the ill part.
I just think like, okay, look, all I'm saying is, gluttony is a sin for a reason.
Yes, it is.
It's a sin in every culture throughout the entirety of mankind. It just is. Lust, unbridled lust is problematic in all religious traditions. Okay? Conceitedness, self-importance is condemned in every religious tradition. Not because of some esoteric sky daddy, but because in a real world sense, this has negative impacts on the individual who is conceited and other people who have to endure the conceitedness of that individual. And it really is fucked up when you got people who are leaders who are conceited. That's what leads to dictatorships, conceitedness. Okay? With people who are in power, you know, who occupy institutions or positions within a polity where they, you know, they're not checked and they're not doing what's best for the polity. They're just doing what's best for themselves, okay? Or what they like.
Is that one of the natural threats of power, though? If it is, then how does one develop the character or the culture of a power character?
Well, shit, man, that's where education comes in. But, you know, like Rome is a perfect example of a polity that, you know, it got too big for its own britches and it's decadent, and people were all about lust, greed, and conceitedness. And it's all about, it wasn't about, okay, so let me just say this and then I'm going to be done and I'm going to let everybody else we're going to end this because we at the damn 2:15 mark, right? So, like, today, everybody likes to perceive themselves as exceptional.
Okay.
Like, I mean, even people who are oppressed like to perceive themselves as exceptional. And, like, better than the masses. I'm better, like, think about it. Don't LGBTQ motherfuckers think that they're better than the masses?
They do. Yes, they do.
Okay.
I know something that they don't. I'm more righteous than those other people who are bad. The masses don't really have an understanding like I have about what justice requires and what it is.
They ignorant.
Women have the same, like with the feminist movement, the same thing occurs. Like I have an understanding of what's just and unjust more so because of my standpoint than those people do.
But through their gender that's the ill part. Not through none of their logic or their thinking. It's just
not the results.
How they feel. So it's like, all right, how do you take in the entirety of your social situation primarily through feelings and not engaging the structure that's involved, more along the line of how the people engage the mouse maze, if you will. You know what I'm saying? It's like, all right, they're disingenuous. So it's like, all right, well, we can't call them crazy no more. You know, I guess that's against the law. It's a hate
for real.
So, maybe that's another word. You can't
it's in the dictionary.
Yeah,
it's a literal definition.
Yeah, but what it comes down to is the value that is placed upon what, and this is the hard part. What is supposed to be good for the situation of social growth. And you have cultures that differ on those, and some are permitted to and some aren't. And it's like, all right, well, what decides how one culture differs from another culture? Is it based upon the laws of, you know, of what? You know what I'm saying? Because what if the laws doesn't rock with one culture? And, you know, it's like, all right, I don't know, because it seemed like it's very heavily tribal. And it seemed like when we present a government perspective to it, that we try to hyper objectify it. You know what I'm saying? Objectify it. And it's like, all right, at what point are we to participate within objectification in it versus a subjectification of it? You know what I'm saying? For our own health and benefit, not necessarily just for the navigation of the system. You know what I'm saying? But within the flex that humanity, that the plantation model definitely will try to keep away from us. But the world seems to value us in that model as well, you know, when they get here.
Well, again, this whole system requires a nigga. You can't have America with no niggas. Somebody's got to be the nigga. That's really the game we're playing at the end of the day. And the question becomes, do you, I'll just finish starting. You can go ahead because I know you haven't even said anything yet, Ken. If we can understand that that's the expected role, then you can begin counteracting with regards to that. And it's why I appreciated certain words that Dr. Neely Fuller used, where he got into a conversation really trying to present counter compensatory action that you take in response to what's going on, not as a declaration of giving up, but in recognizing that this is the thesis. Here you stand as the antithesis. You can then find a solution within the synthesis of the situation. But you can't do that if you're misunderstanding the very thesis in the first place.
Right.
If you don't understand that we're working on a plantation model that is graduated to a corporate model, and this corporate model is now going global, then you're not in a proper position to begin compensatory and responsive action. You're still in a position of reacting, which is where you just default to your biological lowest common denominator when you're put in that scenario. And this is a lot of what we see, because you can get by in this modern environment. You can get by just off of that. You don't need to know any of this, and you can live, grow old, have kids, probably even get with somebody and not know anything about this. The overwhelming majority of people won't. And even those who do, they can choose to ignore it and act as if they don't know, which is another segment of the population that continues on. There's not a large group of critical mass people that need to know these things and engage. Should they? I think that's the very definition of what it means to be a citizen. I think there was an expected base of understanding that if you were going to call yourself a citizen, that you would have a certain level of understanding, but your family would go out of its way to make sure you at least had that baseline context so that you could participate. But again, that has become optional. So people are going to their lowest common denominator. But how much of that is just human nature being human nature versus understanding that there were corporate entities that saw that, decided to play the game, saw that nobody gave any pushback, and so this has become the new norm. I think this is the situation we find ourselves at large, with us at the end of the day still being at the perpetual out-group subordinate male position, not saying we're lesser than, but being placed on that outside with the weird predicament of seeing each other in that same kind of light, which continues to be the main reason why we struggle here, specifically when it comes to creating a system of authority that actually can be passed on and respected from one generation to the next, because that's what's required for institution.
Yeah. So, Brother Ben, man, speak to us, man, and get what you got to get off your chest. I know you came in and I kind of obstructed your ability to speak. So say what you got to say, and then we're going to get ready to close this out, man.
First, giving all praises to the Creator. Greet you, brothers, in peace.
Peace, man.
The citizen, shalom, much respect, much respect. The citizenry. I mean, like you said, when I was listening to you, we have to understand the past so we can understand where we are at this moment. I don't see any success. I mean, it's just you can't stay in the States, man. Or you're literally talking civil war. If you're going against the institution, the two presidents that speak like y'all got assassinated. That's JFK and Abraham Lincoln. They wanted to start a new monetary system to make, America self-sufficient for the people, by the people. And yeah, they got taken out. So y'all, it sounds like y'all speaking about a revolution. I mean, it starts with education and freedoms and rights, but y'all got to be prepared for a revolution. I'm a military veteran. I'm an African Hebrew Israelite. So as a warrior, as a soldier, I mean, it is my nature. But I mean, also when y'all spoke about society and how each one of them had a religious foundation, because that religious foundation, which you said, even when it came to jewelry, like I'm from Israel, so I don't say little people in hats. I can literally call them what they are. It has a check and balance established in that religion. So just like what the doc said, the separation of religion and state is a lie. It never can be. It never has been a separation of state. It's what justified all of their legal actions. So, I mean, being a citizen, participating in the polls, I mean, wasn't that what Black Wall Street was?
Well,
an institution.
Well, let me put it this way. Let me phrase it this way, right? And like a long time ago, I gave a presentation on like what democracy is, right, and how you can deepen it such that you can actually participate in self-governance. Not absolutely, but like the society of more or less is fair, predicated upon whether or not the vast majority of citizens can actually substantively contribute to collective decision making. Like,
I agree.
Even within the context of a family or an organization, you can be satisfied with the decision that's been made if it's been collective, if the process has been fair, if nobody's been obstructed from speaking, if everyone has had time to reflect on all of the proposals that have been made within the context of the forum where the collective decision making was supposed to take place, right? Everybody can say, okay, well, at least I had my say. If this is how we moving, this is how we moving. At least I tried to present my opinion and my viewpoint, but here's what we came to all together. Okay, this is how we gonna move, right? But but there's some. Of course, there are limitations to this as the group of persons becomes larger and larger, right?
Exactly.
It's more room for error, for manipulation. From the what they call obfuscation of facts and shit like that. But like, so at any rate, the idea that is like this: you have something called franchise, scope, and then you have something called authenticity. Franchise is the amount of people involved in a process. Okay, that's the number. So franchise means how many people can actually be involved in the political process, right? The scope means what kinds of domains of life are actually circumscribed within the franchise. Like, what can you actually vote about? What can't you vote about, and what can you? Like, for example, you can't vote in the United States about the Bill of Rights. Like, I mean, you can, but I mean, like, these are things that are given. Like, you can't say, I'm gonna give away my freedom. That's something you can't give away in the United States, so to speak, right?
I was about to say, so to speak, yeah.
But what is under the domain of the political? What actually falls into the category of what you can vote over, okay? And then lastly, you have something called authenticity, which means, is the influence that you have over the process symbolic or is it substantive? Okay. Is it really is it real? Does it have an impact, or is it just some token bullshit? Okay. So you got to take all of that together, the scope, the franchise, and authenticity. And like political scientists have, basically put forth this idea that you have to have balance among these things. Like, you can increase, right, any aspect of scope, franchise, or authenticity, but you can't do so in such a way that it's going to take away from any of the other, aspects of the others. So if you get more franchise and you don't want it to, basically diminish scope and authenticity. If you get more authenticity, you don't want to have it diminish franchise or diminish the scope of what you can talk about. If you have more scope, you don't want it to diminish the franchise or the authenticity. So it's like they interplay with each other, right?
Right.
So,
and in that delicate balancing act, one does that by themselves, or is it best to have, like
it's a regulative principle. It's a regulative principle that you have to look at. Like, so my idea is that in the United States, what you had was the increase of the franchise. All white. First of all, it was only so many white men who could vote in America. You had to have property, right?
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. You were a republic, yeah. You
had
was an
to be
indentured servant.
You had to be a wealthy ass white dude who had some bread if you was gonna make some decisions in the United States at the inception of the nation, correct?
Yes.
An indentured servant couldn't vote, a slave couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, the average white man couldn't vote. Only about how many percentage of the electorate could actually vote? Maybe 20, 25% at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So when that was the case, the franchise was restricted, right? There were certain, not everybody could vote, so the amount of people who were actually involved in the process was small. The scope was large, and the authenticity, meaning like whether or not the participation was substantive or whether it was just symbolic, it wasn't. It was a great deal of authenticity, a large amount of scope, and a small amount of franchise, right?
Yes, it was.
But what happens is they opened up the franchise to everybody. Then guess what ended up happening? The scope of what you could talk about and what you could discuss and the factors of life about which you can vote about becomes smaller.
Right.
And the substance, the authenticity of like the impact of your vote becomes much less important or substantive. Okay, right. So not everybody can vote. Like, but what the fuck is the importance of voting anymore? I'm just asking the question. Like, we can go.
There is no importance.
But I guarantee you, when you got 20% of the electorate that actually are voting, they're voting about some pretty substantive shit that's having an impact over a large amount of people's lives in a real significant way.
Exactly.
Okay? But now you have to ask the question. Now that the franchise has been expanded to where everybody can vote, right? Mm-hmm. How significant is voting at the current moment in the United States? Like, how substantive is it? Like, does it actually lead to an enhancement of overall democracy, or is it just some symbolic bullshit process?
It's symbolic. It's symbolic.
I think it's for the most part, it doesn't really actually have an impact over the trajectory of person's lives anymore.
Well, you got to ask yourself: had you were able to amass the level of wealth that so that whatever the contract was, we're like, all right, yeah, I'll do this as a citizen. But once you start making more money than what your government can engage in, in your sole citizenry, you have. There's no way you're not going to flex some power with it. And let's say that it comes an opportunity for you to put some faux style of selection into the much poorer public to believe that they have some form of that selection over what you do with your wealth, of their benefit that the government says you're supposed to be, due to the fact of you being able to amass such. I mean, if look, War of the Worlds was a radio show in the 30s, and it scared the shit out of the entire nation. I guess they didn't go outside to look. Nobody in the nation went outside to take a look at that shit, but it worked. And if you have such a public who can be, have the wool pull over their eyes to such a degree, why not put out all those illusions? Why not?
Well, here's the issue, because voting and civil rights became a simultaneous issue. And that's what really muddied the entire water behind it all. Right. Because I don't know where I need to do a little bit more research into that. When civil rights and voting became synonymous with each other, that's what threw the balance off.
May I ask a question? When Doc was talking about the franchising of the vote, right? I agree with the Republic and the Constitution. I really do. If you're a broke dude, I really ain't trying to hear nothing you got to say. I don't even think why you should have a say. I totally agree. If you ain't got enough money to bring to the table, why should you even talk? You already got somebody to talk to. Your boss should be the one.
I don't know about that, because that's a different slippery slope. Because here's the problem. You got to take a look at how the extreme has gone here. You now are in a situation where, because money is classified as free speech and corporations can act like persons, you now, as an individual, have to compete with a mega corporation that can amass more money than your entire family's history ever could acquire. And when you're putting that side by side, like you voting against the person down the street and you just happen to make $20,000, $30,000 more dollars a year than they do, it throws the scale off dramatically. And you get things that corporations can do systematically that the average individual, without a deep scale of networking and cooperation on an equal scale, you can't compete with them. I mean, it's one thing to say that, all right, I'm going to become the best boxer I can. I'm going to work on my fundamentals. I'm going to get in the ring and I'm going to prove I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when you take that force and you put it up against power, which is the individuals that own the franchise that you're fighting for, and they're able to set you up with fights that set you up to fail. They can influence things that are in your environment that you otherwise couldn't because their network is extended far greater than yours. I.e., when you're voting, you're not voting for your when you're voting, you're not voting necessarily for your interests. You're voting for the individuals that had the funding to get put on that ballot.
That is
you understand
true.
what I'm saying?
Yes,
like,
I hear you.
This is the difference between looking at the way that can be executed now in the modern era versus the way it was going down in Lincoln's time, for example.
But isn't it all the same? I mean, we talk about corporations. It's a group of people who came together to oppress another. I mean, they just put it on a different name. It's a
gotta
family.
talk about scale. That's like you and me with small arms forming a squad trying to say that we can compete against the Legion as we are with no network against any group of people that's organized enough to have an intelligence agency.
That's insane.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the difference. That's the difference. You can't compare the average citizen to the corporation. You just can't. Yeah. And so when they get to be involved in these systems now, the way an individual can, it throws the scaling off completely off the rails. And it's turned it into something totally different. You now have to join that corporation to have a chance to get influence at that point. And once you are on that, now you're joining the corporation to get a proxy into what is supposed to be a citizen. And this is generally the trajectory that America is going to anyway. But that's what I'm talking about.
I hear you. I agree
a matrix within the matrix.
But I hear you. But you act like that's always been the plan for America. Why it hasn't changed? That's always been the plan, hasn't it?
Okay, but you don't necessarily have to agree to that hook, line, and sinker. Like, there's still a process you have to go through. There's still a measure of conformity that has to occur, or not conformity, but consensuality that has to occur with regards to that. And most of this has gone on under the veil of presupposition, meaning that they don't think they need to know, or they don't think that there's a point in engaging at certain things or acknowledging certain things at a base level. And so they forfeit that, and then these entities win de facto. It's not like they're winning against these hard, struggling campaigns where, it's coming down to the last vote. No, there's nobody there. You got some districts where you got these folks that are sitting there, and they've been 8 times in a row elected, and all it's taken is the same $2,000-$3,000 donations they've been getting from a certain company, and they've been just beating everybody else out because no one knows that they can run for it. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think in an instance like that, what I think what Nameless Protagonist is giving voice to is the argument that you occlude, meaning you exclude certain positions when money becomes the primary factor by which decisions are actually made, like by which the agenda is set. I think that's a better way to say it. If you got money, you get to speak louder than everybody else can speak, and you don't give everybody else ample time to make their own contributions such that a multiplicity of voices can be heard, such that you can make the best and most informed decision, right? So like say, for example, this is just an analogy or a metaphor, right? Let's say, for example, we're at a conference or something like that, right? And you're a small school, like you and your contingency or your faculty or a small school, and then you're debating with people at Harvard, Yale, Brown, or whatever the case may be. You got these really great ideas, right? But you don't have the kind of endowment that these other schools have, and you don't have the kind of promotional materials that the other schools have. So your contribution is not perceived as being of the same kind of import as that of these other schools. And not only do they have more promotional materials and more, marketing dollars, they have a tendency to just hog the dialogue, like to where like when you speak, it's kind of like okay, yeah, and they overtalk you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like being overlooked. So I think it's a bad analogy, but I just tried to make one ad hoc. The idea is that when you introduce money into politics and marketing into politics to such an extent that other people don't have the capacity to have a voice because money is the thing that determines how loud your voice is, then it becomes anti-democratic. Now you're not really actually having a balance of ideas, and the forceless force of the better argument wins. It's just it's like who's the loudest. It's like who's got the loudest sound system as opposed to who has the best quality music. So one of the ways that you can
own purpose. Go ahead.
Well, like one can argue, like say for example, if you're doing a battle of the bands, you should do a battle of the bands on the same sound system. A motherfucker shouldn't be able to come in with his own sound system. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. So you're saying the framework should be objective, but if it isn't, then that makes it subjective, and if it is subjective, then that makes it even more particular, even more sensitively particular.
Well, I mean, what the whole point is, and I'm just trying to, underscore what Nameless was saying, and I think that to some degree this is true. I mean, like, look, I don't mind people with money having an input. They should have input, but they shouldn't be the only motherfuckers with input. They can't drown everybody else out the conversation because they got more money, they got more ads. It's the equivalent of, it's like advertise. It's like advertise. I got more. I can advertise at the Super Bowl, so your shit you don't ever get a chance to sell your products.
Right.
I'm gonna keep buying space at the Super Bowl, nigga, and I'm gonna keep putting these ads out here. You ain't gonna never get time. Nobody's ever gonna get a look at you.
And it gets goofy because you'll get people repelling in from the ceiling like, they earned that. You ain't earned the ability to do that. Sit your grab hungry ass down. Like, you can't go nowhere with that.
Well, I don't have a problem with money, big money, being able to, to have influence at all. But I mean, they can't be the only influence. They can't be like crowding the conversation and then like nobody else gets any time. That's bullshit.
What does that make the system if citizenry is tied into one's money? Like what actually is the system if that's the case? So let's say that is the case. How are we viewing this and what illusion that is presenting itself to us as opposed to what it actually is? If your citizenry is tied to money, what does that make the system? Because I don't know.
Again, bro, again, let me just cut this off, right? And say, at one point in time, and this is important for people to get, man. Money was not that thing. Your ability to do business and to have money was not the determining factor of your dominance or your masculinity or your power. Like the king is still the king, even if that motherfucker broke. Okay? Now, some kings were, pretty much broke and they had to borrow money from other powerful people, right? Or wealthy people, and they had to pay it back. But, sometimes they would just take the shit. Like, fuck this, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna pay, like how them boys said, I'm gonna get that pack from you, and I ain't bringing back shit. Them hot boys ain't bringing back shit. you heard the songs before. Like I'm taking your dope.
Yeah.
So I mean, but the whole point is masculinity in ancient times was never perceived as a mercantile enterprise. It was never perceived as such. Right. But nowadays, the market is perceived as the embodiment of what masculinity is. That's just not how ancient men perceived it. And who should have influence and who should not. Like, money making is cool, but like the people who were like the generals and who performed valiantly in war, those were the people who were perceived to be, the guys who should have the most influence. Right. Not just because some cat got a lot of bread. Okay, so you got some bread, that don't make you like a virtuous person in and of itself. That's not like, men had the ability to see this, but not today. Today, your virtue is connected to your money, even if you don't have any virtue at all. It's all about the money you have in the the display of opulence and the image. It ain't even about real shit anymore. It ain't even about substance anymore. It's about your projection of substance, the illusion of your substance. You know
as
what I'm saying,
someone who
son?
studies history, I'm looking at the Persian Empire. I'm looking at the Roman Empire. I'm looking even. I wouldn't say the British had an empire because they still run it, but it seems like America is going down the way of Rome.
Down? It ain't. It's always been Rome. It's just taking off the mask. Shit. What the fuck?
I mean, when I say going down the thing of Rome, it's like usually it got so. What is the word I'm looking for? It got so vulgar, so immoral that outside forces came and destroyed what Rome was, and that's what it looks like is going to happen.
Wait a minute. What was the morality of America that you saw?
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, just the ABC.
When was it ever a high moral?
It was when it was created. When it was created, it was based on Christianity, and that's how they founded their laws.
I'm sorry.
I get what he's. I get what both of y'all are saying, but let me get ready to. I'm gonna make sure that we can get some closing statements here real soon, and then everybody can go off into their corners and eat and drink and be merry or whatever the case may be. But there's something to be said about how much debauchery has now been excused in American culture. Like, I mean, you can't deny that the country has become less puritanical than it was. Now, some people say that's a good thing. Like, the puritanicalness of America is just like, it's been too much, right? It's been over puritanical. It's extremely puritanical to the detriment of the freedom of its citizens. And then on the other hand, you got people who say, well, it's not puritanical enough. All of the values that held before the center, the moral center, there's nothing there anymore. It's just moral nihilism. It's moral subjectivism. Anything goes now, right? But I think to Rogish, to Bill Monger's point, you got to think, man. It's always been freaky shit going on in America, even with the veneer of puritanicalness put over it. Like the plantation was a freaky spot, bro. Motherfuckers was doing something strange for pieces of change around that bitch.
I mean, it's human nature.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, real strange. Like, hanging niggas, cutting their nuts
based
off
of what measurement?
Man, eating people's, cutting niggas' dicks off because some white bitch said that he made a pass at me. The nigga made a pass at me while she was backing that thing up and told him, if you ever got caught, nigga, you're gonna hang. Like, that's some strange shit.
That's human nature?
No, not that way, bro.
No.
I'm just saying, and fucking little boys, like, that shit went down on the plantation.
Yeah.
Like,
So my question is, who is doing the judgment of the character of those involved? And if it's 40 or let's say 80 years or whatever that people washing themselves of such character, and I'm not talking about moral. I don't, not judging them based off any morale other than an objective humanity that we all tend to interact with one another. It's like, all right, wait, hold up. You know what I'm saying? I'm still measuring based off of how far away from there have they removed themselves. And it's like, all right, well, the way that they orchestrate any nation, it doesn't make sense that it would hold up and be functional, for any long at a time. You know what I mean? So it means that the people must have a different value of themselves other than that of the citizenry being proud citizen of blah, 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 whatever world. You know what I mean? We get back to the whole wheel of fire. Konoha has been destroyed like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, right? But what is it that rebuild it? The connection of the people and their value of themselves, you know what I'm saying, based off of a cultural lineage. They can rebuild every time they get destroyed, but it has to be something within, you know what I'm saying? I think that's the issue that people are dealing with. They want the value of what the culture of being an American is based off of the U.S. perspective, as opposed to what their humanity tells them that they've lived and developed, you know what I'm saying, being, I guess, a product of the joint. On that, I'll mash out. Thank y'all for the sharpening. Peace.
Peace
Much
out, man.
respect.
Peace.
Much respect.
So look here, Ben, man. We're gonna let you make some closing statements, and then we're gonna get to Nameless and Admiral, and then we up out this thing, man. I should have cut it loose, man, maybe about an hour ago, but Sorry. So, my brother Ben, you got some closing statements for us, man?
I greatly appreciate the discussion and the back and forth of minds and allow me to conceive different ideas that I didn't have. So I appreciate the education. It makes me better for this. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you for
very
coming,
much.
man. Appreciate you for your contribution, man. Appreciate it. Nameless. Well, let me get Admirable first, because Admiral first, man, because he probably sleep over there in the UAE, man. It's cracking. Yeah, he sleep, man. He probably done faded to black right now. I know it's super early in the morning.
It's WTFAM out there, man.
And I know we kind of been drifting, man, in the conversation for a minute too, man. So, Nameless, take us home, bro.
Look, we're just gonna sum it up real simple. Ain't no such thing as Brahmin niggas. Stop it. It's that simple. It really is.
Right. Hey, look here, bro. Let me just say this, man. Like, I feel you on that, man. I do, man. I really and truly do, bro. And look, I'm not the type of guy, man, who, I think that there's some people, man, who, I don't claim to be speaking with authority such that, like, everything I say is the gospel and the things that other men have to say should be discounted on the account that I have an advanced degree. That's never been my position in this space or any other. Because I believe in democracy. I believe in equal contribution. I don't believe in people getting drowned out because they have money, education, or, based on some other extenuating factor, okay? I believe that everybody should have the capacity to contribute to the public conversation and to have an impact on collective decision-making. I don't think that experts or people with degrees should hog the conversation. I don't believe that. But then I don't think I should be excluded either. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, for people who say, well, let's be honest about this shit. Like, the whole disparaging of academicians recently has come from Fox News and shit. Like Hannity and Combs or some shit, or Bill O'Reilly, like basically being, kind of frustrated with what's going on with the, liberal academicians or people in race or gender studies. And I mean, to some degree, rightfully so. These people on the left need to be criticized, but I mean, so do people on the right. They don't just get a pass either. I think that the quality of dialogue in the United States has taken a downturn in the past 40 to 50 years. I mean, like, the quality of debates and the variety of positions has narrowed dramatically in the United States over the past 40 to 50 years to now you have students who don't want to hear positions to the contrary of what they believe. They believe that they need to be protected by an administrative class in the university system, which I think is ridiculous. So
ironically anti-American by definition.
Well, anytime you got a group of kids, as soon as you say, sex is a fact about biology, and then motherfucking kids start booing and shit, that's just retarded to me, man. I mean, I know you can't even say retarded anymore. Okay, that's
case in point.
But I mean, but it is kind of like disrespectful to people who have, mental illnesses and things like that. So, but the point, it's stupid to me. It's silly because look, there's some things that like I understand that people who explore different kinds of sexuality, like they're still human beings. I get that. But come on, fam. You're not going to get me to sit here and believe like that there's no biological distinctions amongst human beings predicated on sex, man. I'm not going to sit here and accept that bullshit. It's because it's ridiculous. Now you got motherfuckers calling people birthing people because you got people who transition that want to identify as men, but still who can give birth. So now they're birthing people and shit. Like, I mean, bro, I'm done, man. Like, I'm not with that, bro. And this is why a motherfucker like Jordan Peterson blew up. Because not all of his knowledge has to be set to the side in order to accommodate the position of a group of people in the academy who feel like they have a monopoly on justice talk. And if you don't adhere to their position related to justice talk, then you're evil. And I mean, there's some people who are on the right or the left that they can go to extremes. Like, for some reason, man, it's just like, I'm an Aristotelian. I don't know if I prefer Aristotle over Plato, okay? And why do I? Because the morality of Aristotle is that you could err excessively or deficiently. You can be vicious by going too far or not going far enough. Right? So that's my position on morality. Like, courage, you could err in being too courageous, which is called rashness, and you could err by not having enough courage, which is called cowardice. You could be, okay, so let's say, for example, somebody is funny. That's a virtue, right?
Right.
Now, I mean, like, you could be an asshole too by, like, not having any filter, right? Which would make you rude, right? But then on the other hand, you can have no ability to be humorous at all, which would make you a prude or like a boorish person. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And you could be, let's say, for example, when it comes to, just being magnanimous, like being friendly and giving things, like you could give too much, which is like being a fool. Like don't bless motherfuckers. Like, don't go give the strippers at the strip club all of your fucking cash, man. You fuck up a few commas, but not all the commas. Okay? But no, if you don't fuck up any commas at all, you're stingy. You're a miser. If you don't give anything at all, like if you go to the strip club and you don't even give a bitch one dance or throw a bitch $2 come on. It's like, you're not magnanimous at all. You're not fun. You're not even having any fun. You understand? I mean, and I know that's a bad analogy, but like, let's say, for example, you at the bar, right? And motherfuckers everybody's doing rounds and shit, and everybody's contributing to doing rounds. But you always got that one nigga who just refuses to buy a round at all. He just there drinking and shit. He ain't gonna spend none of his money. And then you might have one guy who's spending too much, he's just blowing too much of his money. So it's a balance, you know what I'm saying? Like, virtue requires a balance. So I believe,
Well, I use that, the way I describe that is with a very basic analogy, because it comes up a lot in swordsmanship. If you take sand and you grasp it too tightly, it slips between your fingers. But if you take that same sand and you don't grasp it tight enough, it does the exact same thing.
Right. Yeah, there you go. I mean,
so I understand. I'm with you.
It's practical wisdom as it pertains to matters of morality. You know what I'm saying? It's not just a principle that you got to adhere to all times. It's like you got to look at shit that's going on and you got to figure it out in real time. And the only way you become good at it is by practicing it. You're going to fail. You're going to make bad moral judgments here and there. But I mean, you want to be, you want to hit the mark most of the time for people to perceive you as virtuous. It ain't just following a set of principles. It's acting according to a certain character, you know what I'm saying, that you develop over time. And, it's like these kids today, man, they're zealots to ideals. They're not like even being practical anymore or like understanding when too much is too much, right? And like having like grown people at the university monitor like what's to trigger you or not, that's some cupcake bullshit, man. Like, it's too much, man. It's too much. It's like, it's cupcake shit. Like, you can't hear something that upsets you without, like going off in the deep end. It's like, fuck all that, bro. Like, just some shit's gonna be offensive. It's not the end of the world, man. Like now motherfuckers getting canceled over simple shit. Because kids can't take it anymore. They got triggered. They start crying and shit. And I want the staff to protect me. That like, what happens when you get out of school? Then the corporation protects you. And motherfuckers are asking for the corporations to protect them. I mean, think about it. Fire Dave. Don't let him do a special anymore because he hurt our feelings. Get rid of Tory Lanez. Or no, that's a bad example. Let me pull back from that. But get rid of who's the one motherfucking dude who said some shit at Rolling Loud and everybody got offended by the baby. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, it's like everybody's too sensitive, man. And there's one dude that explained it really perfectly, I think. It's like toxic matriarchy. It's like toxic maternal instincts. It's like, get off the teat, motherfucker. Stop asking for protection from your mommy. Get around her leg, and get out in the world. And it's a difference between parenting, how mothers parent and how fathers parent. Mothers, like typically always have the youngest kids around them and are always scared to get them out of eyesight or eye shot and shit like that. Whereas dads want you to push your limits and shit and see how far you can go and to take risks and shit like that. The kids ain't taking risks no more. Just like, no risk is just no risk. You don't even want to risk your feelings getting hurt. The fuck? Do dialogue?
I mean, it's one thing when that's a few people who have that kind of sentiment, right? But when this is kind of more systematic, that's when it starts really affecting macro issues overall. Like this has become a cultural phenomenon as you're describing. I mean, it's
the cupcake shit. But let's end this, man. We'll keep drifting forever, bro. So thank you for coming, man. We at the 3-hour mark. Thank you, brother, for coming. Sandog, thank you for coming. I know you probably sleep there in the UAE. It's probably somewhere around about 5 in the morning. Sorry we drifted off, man, and kind of went into our own little thing. But appreciate all of y'all for coming, man. And let's do this again real soon, man. Os. Peace. Yeah, it was one.